Welcome to the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC on ESPN 43, Vera versus Sandhagen, also known as UFC San Antonio. I'm your host, Ben Duffy of Sherdog.com. With me once again, stepping up, the clutch man himself, Mr. Devin Tejada, Dev Goes Fishing. Dev, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. I'm happy to be here. I love doing all this stuff with you guys. MMA is one of my favorite things in the world.
I mean, if I had a fishing podcast, I would certainly invite you on, but that's not what I got. This is, and I'm glad you're here with me. And you can tell me, like, real secret, like, is it cooler when I can't do one and Keith gives you a call to co-host, or is it cooler when I give you a call and bring you on?
I love both my kids.
Oh, good grief. This diplomatic bastard right here is not going to give me a straight answer. That's okay. I'm only here for you to give me straight answers about UFC San Antonio. Let's talk about this one. We're in the middle of kind of a weird stretch for the UFC. We just barely finished with UFC 286, which was, of course, the trilogy matchup between Leon Edwards and Kamaru Usman. That was weird because it was only 2 weeks after UFC 285, and then 3 weeks from this card we have UFC 287. So there are going to be 3 pay-per-view cards by the UFC in the space of less than 2 months running. You know, UFC asking like $230, $240 out of us in the space of 7 weeks. But the fight night cards in between, I feel, are kind of a mixed bag. We had UFC Las Vegas 2 weeks ago, which was not at the Apex, but was actually at whatever the hell it is they're calling the joint at the Hard Rock now. So they brought a little bit of that mid-size arena vibe back to their Las Vegas shows. This one is in San Antonio at the AT&T Center, home of the San Antonio Spurs. So it once again is going to be one of those on-the-road fight nights. It would be a whole different side conversation to talk about what this does to those 3 pay-per-view cards, you know, like whether any of them is being buried, whether anyone is being pushed forward. But I'd rather talk about this fight night card. Looking at this one, this is something I usually remember to ask Keith, but I don't always. Give me your letter grade for this card in advance, just based on how good it is on paper, how much you're looking forward to it. Understanding that, of course, we grade this by a different standard than we would a card that they're asking for money for.
This card is probably going to be a little bit better than it looks on paper, just due to the actual like flyweight bouts on there. Like flyweights, if you like MMA, you love flyweights. Men's flyweight, some women's bantamweight on there. That's always a little bit iffy. But when you have a guy like Chidi Vera and a guy like Corey Sandhagen as the main event over 5 rounds, bantamweights are so good. I mean, this is going to get a C+ for me on paper, but based on and that's only really based on, like, you know, do any of these fights really matter? We know the main event matters, but how many of the other ones really matter? You know, if Holly Holm wins, she'll, you know, what happens when Holly Holm wins a fight? But yeah, I'm going to give it a C+. But man, I really love flyweights, and there's a bunch of flyweight fights on here. So, like, you know, strap up your boots, because this is probably going to be better than it looks.
Yeah, and I agree with you there. I actually will give it a little bit of a higher grade. I'm going to give this one a B-, and it's for the reasons you mentioned, plus just a couple more things worth noting. You pointed out how many men's flyweight fights there are in this card, the fact that we have a fantastic bantamweight headliner. There is only 1 fight on this entire card north of welterweight. There are only 2 north of lightweight. This card is jammed with the lighter weights, which, as somebody who frequently complains about the UFC putting ridiculous, stupid, unranked heavyweight fights on the main card just because they feel they have to, just about all of these fights at least have the potential to be a whole lot of fun. There's also, this is a pretty well booked card geographically. When the UFC really ramped up its offerings kind of from 2014 to 2017, when we started going to 30, 40 pay-per-views a year, when we started, or not 40 pay-per-views a year, but 30, 40 events a year, started getting to where weeks off were fewer and fewer, the UFC's schedule got so it became just such a treadmill or such an assembly line that I remember there was this rash of fighters who they would ask them for a call out after a win, and the fighters wouldn't call out a fighter, they'd call out a place. They'd be like, oh, well, I see the UFC's in Denver on May 23rd. I'd love to fight somebody on that card. And it's because the UFC, because it had so many fighters that they had to meet obligations to, they had so many cards they had to fill, they lost the ability to do sensible geographic matchmaking. This card has sensible geographic matchmaking. There are 13 fights on this card. 9 of them have at least one Texan fighter on them. And on the 8 fight prelims, 7 of the 8 have at least one Texan fighter on them. That's smart. Like, why wouldn't you do that? Just from sticking, say, CJ Vergara. CJ Vergara is, I mean, he's probably fighting for his job. He is nowhere within shouting distance of the top 15 or top 25 at flyweight, but he's going to put 50 more butts in the seats just from family, friends, people that he trains with. That's just smart matchmaking. And it's, I mean, Bellator does it to a fault. Anytime Bellator goes to a city they don't go to very often, or anytime they go to Europe, they just jam their undercard with local fighters, regardless of merit. Here, the merit is mostly good. Hailey Cowan is a superstar in the making that just needs more time in the spotlight, and obviously to keep winning. To get her fighting in Texas makes a lot of sense. Now that Derek Lewis seems to be in free fall, Trevin Giles is probably Houston's best fighter right now. They got him on the card. Daniel Pineda, if you're outside of Texas, you know him as kind of like this journeyman who's popped up in every major promotion. If you're from Houston, you know that he is the OG, like one of the most universally respected, if not feared, fighters in town. Like, just smart matchmaking. Chidi and Njokuani, even. The guy's from Dallas, and he's going to get a warm welcome when he shows up. So I do like it for those reasons. I think a lot of the intangibles will be there. I wish I were going to this card. As anybody who has listened to the show for more than 30 minutes knows, I live in Houston. I typically cover any major events that come through my state, but I'm actually going to be out of town this coming weekend. I'm going to be in Atlanta, of all places. So I won't be covering UFC San Antonio in person. That is just a damn shame. The answer to this question that I'm going to ask you next is screamingly obvious. So instead, I'm going to say, other than the winner of the main event, who at UFC San Antonio is closest to a title shot if they win on Saturday?
Unfortunately, Holly Holm.
I think you're probably right.
I don't even have to look at the card. I have my phone here with all my notes, and it's got to be Holly Holm, right? I mean, I think you're
right. Like, former
Maycee
title
Barber? After?
No, like Maycee Barber, there's just such a traffic jam at 125.
But that's how far you got to go down,
Yeah, honestly, if Manel Kape makes weight and lances Alex Perez, he wouldn't be too far down Keith's theoretical Sean Shelby call list. On the recap. Just, he's former champ, extremely exciting. Just, has had weight problems. The UFC would push him forward if they could.
They want,
and it's for some of the same reason as Holm. Former champs in the UFC always have a quicker road back to a title fight. Like Cain Velasquez, even during his injury wilderness years that led up to his retirement, he was never more than one win away from a title shot. Like, even as far as the Ngannou fight, if you beat Ngannou, title fight next. Holly Holm has that same thing, especially in as hollowed out a division as 135. Kape at 125, obviously it's much more crowded, but incoming champs who left their former promotion as the champ, have, I think, a kind of a similar shortcut to a title fight if they can earn it.
Is Holly Holm at her age? She's 40 now?
41.
She's 41 now. Outside of Amanda Nunes, can she still beat every women's bantamweight on the roster?
Well, I mean, she is coming off that loss to Ketlen Vieira, but Ketlen Vieira is she's the UFC's best 139-pound fighter. So
well, it's like, is she waiting out Nunes? Like, what else are you holding on for?
I don't know. I honestly,
we'll get to it. But...
We'll get to it. You know, there are reasons. We'll talk about that fight when we get to it. Otherwise, we'll skip the 11 fights before it and just start digging right into that one. Is there any prelim matchup, or if not matchup, at least prelim fighter in particular that you're especially excited to see on Saturday?
Vinicius Salvador, like, that's a dude. Like, that's why you watch MMA. Like, he's that guy where, like, that's just how his fights go. He's not the first one, but we'll talk about him in a second. But a guy like him is like who I like to, if you like watching MMA, like, he's a guy to maybe keep your eye on. Yeah,
he's thus far, he's been a live by the sword, die by the sword fighter, and he has, to his credit, lived more often than he died. We'll get into the details on that when we get to it. Any other general thoughts on this card before we dive in?
I don't think people should shame this card as much as they might looking at it on paper, because all these lower weight class guys and girls, right now, if you were to take any bantamweight in the top 15 and just make them a 205er, like, they're the champion.
Yep.
Like, if you made Cheeto a 205er, he's killing people.
Yes, absolutely.
And I don't think everybody really realizes that. Like, anyone in the top 15 at flyweight, like, as far as like skill level, like, who is technically good at MMA, like, they're all fucking good. Like,
yes,
these are like, this is gonna be high level shit. Like, these are good fighters, even though they might not be ranked, even though you might not know who they are, even though they might have a couple losses on the record. Like, these lower weight class fighters are usually really good.
Oh, absolutely. They're the lighter weight classes are much more skilled than the higher weight classes, and it's not as easy to notice because obviously 205ers are fighting other 205ers, heavyweights are fighting other heavyweights. But when if you can do the mental work to kind of isolate what you're actually seeing in the cage, it's real obvious that they're just better fighters, better athletes. I mean, like, well, let's dig into this for a sec. In comparing any two weight classes, there are typically two questions I'll ask myself. One, how good, and this is either worldwide or in a promotion, within the bounds of a promotion, it's the same exercise. Worldwide, how good is the 50th best fighter in that weight class?
And are there even 50?
Or are there, yeah, if it's women's featherweight, are there even 50? But just for example, and I'll take a look here.
Like, who's the 35th ranked bantamweight in the world? It's going to be someone really freaking good.
Right. Well, here, let's see. According to Tapology, the people floating around the 50 point, Ronnie Lawrence, Brian Kelleher.
Yeah.
Those are good fighters. They are guys with well-rounded skills. They're decent athletes. They're well-conditioned. Here, let's, for a moment, take a look at the 50th best heavyweight in the world.
I can't
50th best heavyweight in the world, according to Tapology. I'm looking at, I got Parker Porter at the 48, Carlos Felipe at the 50, Jake Collier is 51. They all have individual skills that are good, but they all have serious holes in their games. None of the guys I just named have solid 3-round cardio. None of them are particularly good athletes, even compared to like the better athletes in at their own weight. It's a gaping gulf in just how good the fighters are. Like, of course, like Parker Porter would beat up Brian Kelleher. He's literally twice his size. But, when you isolate that and just say, okay, what are their skills? What are their athletic abilities? It's not even close.
Yeah. And like for Brian Kelleher, like if he were to fight anyone in the between, 10 to 20 in that region, short notice, like unless your name is Umar Nurmagomedov, like that dude's going to give you a fight.
Yep. Yeah. Doesn't tend to be an easy out for anybody.
And if you slid Parker Porter up to that level, like probably just get killed. We saw what Gelson Almeida did to him.
Absolutely. The other question I ask about any division, and this is more restricted to within the bounds of a promotion, what do you have to do to get to the top 10? What do you have to do to get to a title shot? I mean, in 2018, in the UFC welterweight division, you had to win 6-7 fights in a row just to get onto the top 10. Like, there were people like Santiago Ponzinibbio, Vicente Luque out there, like putting together 6 and 7 fight win streaks just to like ping the radar of the top 10. We have people in the UFC right now. We got Bilal Muhammad, just found out that he's going to have to extend his unbeaten streak to 10 in order to get a title shot, probably. We got Beneil Dariush out there having to extend his unbeaten streak at lightweight to what is it? Will it be 9? Merab Dvalishvili just barely finally got a title shot at 135. Meanwhile, at heavyweight, you can come in from nothing, and if you win 5 fights in a row, you've got a title shot already. You might be in the top 10. If you win 3 in a row in the UFC, you're probably getting a top 10 opponent in your next fight.
I mean, someone in a lower weight class that you're very familiar with that has, I won't say he's been fast tracked, but his performances, he's in the places he is due to his performances and his skills. Look at Adrian Yanez. Like, he's a bantamweight. The dude's had to fight his ass off to get where he is. And he's, and he is a guy that's like, having wars with people or murking people. And he's still having, he's about to fight Rob Font. How many more fights until he gets a title shot? 3?
Maybe. You'll find no bigger booster of Yanez than me. Yeah, Yanez is a Houston guy. He's an absolutely incredible fighter. And he's also stuck in a division where Sean O'Malley is eating up all the spotlight. So yeah, it's something that happens in the lighter divisions. There are more fighters, there are better fighters, they're better conditioned, they're better skilled. I mean, you just kind of waved a hand dismissively at the Holly Holm Yana Santos fight. But if either of them decided they wanted to fight at 145, they could have a title shot this weekend.
All they need to do is go beat Norma Dumont, and then they can just win it. Then they can.
If Holly Holm said, I'm willing to fight at 145, they'd skip Dumont. They'd skip Dumont.
Yeah, you're right. I don't even know what I'm saying. I could go fight Amanda Nunes at 145 if I wanted to, write a letter. I'm ready.
If you wanted all your teeth to be on the ground, you could go fight.
Yeah, people like that are the reasons why I'm a gun owner.
Yep. Oh man, shall we dig into these prelims?
Yes, sir.
At least as the card is currently constituted, first fight out of the gate at UFC San Antonio is a women's bantamweight matchup between Hailey Cowan and Tamires Vidal. Cowan, the 31-year-old Waco, Texas native, is 7-2 overall. This will be her UFC debut. She won her way onto the promotion at Dana White's Contender Series week 4 last August, where she took a split decision over Claudia Leite. Prior to that, she'd actually fought on one of the Dana White looking for a fight events. That was LFA 63, I think, back in 2019. Here, signed despite getting just a decision win in that fight, just because I think Dana White pretty obviously saw the star potential there. Here she gets her debut, and it's going to be against Vidal, who actually is coming off a win. 24-year-old Brazilian is 7-1 overall. She's 1-0 in the UFC. She knocked out, or at least stopped, Ramona Pascual with a flying knee to the body at UFC Fight Night Rodriguez versus Lemos last November. That was in the first round. So here she'll be looking for, her second straight win in the octagon. She is not favored to do so, but the line is really close. Right now, Cowan is out there around -120. Vidal, even money, +100. In talking about, son of a bitch. You know what? I can splice this. All right. Cowan actually had been scheduled to make her UFC debut on February 25th. She was scheduled to fight Eileen Perez, who incidentally fought Vidal on the regional scene back in Argentina. Cowan was forced out of that with an illness that she later revealed was a ruptured ovarian cyst. I do not have any ovaries, but that sounds extraordinarily painful. She is back, and this is now going to be her debut, and she debuts against the other side of that epic samurai fight night, main event between Vidal and Perez. Keith and I made it as far as previewing the Cowan versus Perez fight because that was canceled between weigh-ins and between fight night. And Keith kind of gave me a hard time because normally Keith is the one that is harder on his local fighters. He famously hard on New England fighters, where I tend to be a little bit of an admitted homer for Texas fighters. But, I said I was at that LFA event where she fought in front of, Dana White, Matt Serra, Dean Thomas on the Looking for a Fight card. And I talked to her that night. I watched her fight. I saw the in-house crowd reaction because that fight was in Waco where, she was a star athlete at Baylor. She still trains in Waco. She's married to the head coach of Blitz MMA now. Like she is Waco through and through. And I said, she's going to be in the UFC. And if she keeps developing, she's going to be a star. I don't know if she's going to be a champ, but she's going to be a draw. And here she is. She's in the UFC, but in some ways, I almost expected her to have done more by now. She is a slightly refined version of the fighter that she was in 2019. I do like that she's moved up to 135. Like, I don't know how she made 125. She's built like a tank. She's 5'8", and it's kind of like Holly Holm. When you get near her, you realize that she's not, from 50 feet away, Holly Holm looks like a model. From 10 feet away, she looks like a fitness model. Like, you're like, oh, you got muscles on your muscles. Like just
like a CrossFitter. Like
exactly. Cowan's got the same thing. She was a tumbler, which is, a form of gymnast in college. She's got that kind of body. She still doesn't look fully comfortable on the feet. She looks like a woman who turned to MMA in her mid-20s and still has fewer than 10 fights. She is taken much more naturally to the ground game. She's very powerful. I said she's a plus athlete, but not the kind of off the charts athlete you would expect of someone who was a national champion tumbler. I still stick by that. Like, Keith would give me shit for that if he was here. You're welcome to. But she's a plus athlete. She's fast. She's coordinated. She's extremely strong. I don't know whether she wins this fight or not, although I'm about to give a prediction, but the striking is going to have to keep developing from here, or she's going to hit a ceiling in this 135-pound division pretty quickly. The good news is I think she's got everything she needs to beat Vidal. Vidal, most people's introduction to her was that Ramona Pascual fight where Pascual, not a good fighter, blew weight, so probably underprepared in some way or another, and Vidal crushed her with this flying knee to the liver that folded Pascual. But that is not normally Vidal's game. She is not high-flying offense. She is not Manel Kape that we're going to be talking about later. She mostly has been a grinder and kind of topside grappler. She had wins on the regional scene in Brazil and Argentina by like a Kimura from topside. Her last decent win in Brazil was a heel hook, and it was a heel hook that she leaned back for a heel hook from top position like it was Pancrase in 1996. The fact that it worked is almost worse because it means that she's going to try it again sometime. But none of the things that have carried her to victory seem likely to work against Hailey Cowan to me. She's not going to be able to bull rush her and just fling her down and take top position. Or if she is, I'm very wrong about Hailey Cowan. I think if she runs across the cage and throws a flying knee at Hailey Cowan's midsection, Cowan's going to laugh and step out of the way. If not, just swat her out of the air like Mike Brown did to Uriah Faber. So I'm glad that Tamires Vidal made it to the UFC. And in this division where 135 is honestly kind of wide open and she already has a win, she's probably going to get several more fights. But this is a good matchup for Hailey Cowan to get a win in front of the Texas crowd. Give me Cowan to win a pretty dominant decision here. I'm not going to pick a finish, though. If Vidal starts getting really tired, I could see Cowan taking the back, choking her out. But I see Cowan winning this going away. It's not going to go to the ground unless Cowan wants it there. And Vidal's probably going to get tired first. Cowan will start kind of rolling downhill on her. So Cowan by decision for me. What do you got?
What's the betting line one more time?
Betting line right now, it's close. Cowan minus 120, Vidal plus 100.
Women's MMA is so tough if you're like a sports bettor. God, this past weekend should tell you everything about that. Oh. Miller kind of getting cooked, and then Casey O'Neill kind of getting cooked even worse. The Casey O'Neill one was, not as surprising, but gosh, Hailey Cowan could come out here and just take Vidal down and force her to give her back and just choke her out right away. I could see that happening. I could also see a slog. Vidal she is large. She does look like she can hit pretty hard. I don't know how much weight I put on landing a jump knee on Ramona Pascual that blew weight. Like,
if your opponent blew weight, hit the body. That's my new advice.
I think you might have seen me saying this, but like, in the chat, I'm always putting, hit the body on opponents that miss weight, with little light bulbs or little key emojis. Like, this is, ask Malcolm Gordon what happens when you can't finish cutting weight or you blow weight and you get hit in the liver. So I don't know how much weight I put onto that. But also to just their regional scene, like LFA based in Texas, like that's a really good place to learn how to fight.
Yep.
It's going to be way better than some of the, like what's the difference between Vidal's regional fights and like just smoker fights and gym fights, like as a skill level with opponents? You know what I mean?
I mean, I have famously mocked to the point that people have kind of backlashed me for it, that Tamires Vidal and Eileen Perez are both in the UFC right now, and I saw them fight each other like less than 2 years ago on interlocking nursery school gym mats, like those foam mats that look like puzzle pieces, like fighting those, and a cage that like sagged from side to side. Like, you literally cannot prepare to fight even LFA level competition in that kind of environment. They're going to be fine because they're 135, 145 pound women. They're going to there's people they can beat, but yeah, like. Regional scene in Brazil, there are some good promotions, but not many at this point.
Yeah.
Shudo Brazil.
Sketchy.
Yeah. Shudo Brazil gives us some decent fighters. Jungle Fight is still solid.
Yeah.
Aspera FC is a good promotion, but if you're from Astra Fight Team, which is basically affiliated with it, you were probably built up on less qualified fighters. So even there's a little bit of sketchiness there. Like, it's a far cry from this place that, 30 years ago was the birthplace of no holds barred fighting as we know it. So, yeah.
And like LFA is a really good regional MMA promotion. Like, if you just look at their records, I mean, in 2021, Vidal won via illegal knees against
that was the Eileen Perez fight.
Yeah, it's kind of like, how do you feel, and then you switch over to Hailey Cowan, and she does have a loss to Victoria Leonardo. That was her debut, and she's in the UFC right now. Is she good or not? That I won't be the one to tell you that. But I do think Hailey Cowan's just, her game is also a little bit better suited for MMA. She uses her physicality pretty well. She does have a submission-based grappling game. If she can kind of do what Brendan Allen has done, where when Brendan Allen started, coming into the UFC, he was known for a grappler, same LFA thing where you could tell Brendan Allen used to get kind of shook up when he had to strike with people. He used to get kind of shook up. And that's kind of what Hailey Cowan reminds me of a little bit. She just gets a little shook up from it. She doesn't look very comfortable, but the only thing that can change that is exposure. Like, you just got to do it. It's like riding a roller coaster. The 100th time is not going to be as scary as the first.
Yep.
Her problem is she's 31. Like, she's going to win this fight for me. I do think she's going to win this fight. I do think she's going to probably cause Vidal to make a mistake, and probably just going to take her back and choke her. That's what I really think. She's going to just catch her in a weird spot. Maybe allowing her to get up, tricking her into getting up and just taking the back. That's her thing, rear naked chokes. And I haven't seen anything from Vidal to prove to me that she's, if she had 5 fights in the LFA with 4 wins and 1 loss, I'd be thinking a lot different.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to go Hailey Cowan here. Surprised the line is where it is, though. Someone's going to find that and hammer it, and it's going to probably change by Friday night.
Do you think it's probably going to slide further in the direction of Cowan?
Yeah, I think it's probably going to get to like +2, like minus 200,
I think you're probably right. If gambling were legal in Texas, like I think it would push even further, just with like actual people there. But you know, we won't have the Connor in Vegas effect anyway. What's your actual pick for this fight?
I'm going Hailey Cowan. Again, I just think, you know, both of them have similar games, and I just think Hailey Cowan has proven a little bit more, and I think she's a little bit more physical. Vidal is a big girl. Like, I was like, is this fight at featherweight when I first looked at it? So one of them, you know, Cowan's moving up, but like, I don't know, like you said, I don't know how the hell she ever made 125.
Yeah. And I mean, her fight on the Contender Series was at 135 as well. So, you know, she's been moved up. She's definitely fills out a 135 pound frame just fine. What's your predicted method of victory here?
I think she's going to submit her probably round 2.
Okay.
Vidal is going to get tired. They're going to probably have some back and forth grappling exchanges. Vidal gets tired, and then she has a mistake, and I think she's going to get choked for it.
All right, there you have it. 2 picks for Hailey Cowan to get it done in the UFC on ESPN 43 opener. Next up on the UFC San Antonio prelims, we have a men's flyweight matchup between Victor Altamirano and Vinicius Salvador. Altamirano, the 32-year-old Mexican fighting out of Dallas-Fort Worth, is 11-2 overall. He's 1-1 since joining the UFC out of the 2021 season of Dana White's Contender Series. He lost his debut in a very close, contentious split decision to Carlos Hernandez. That was last February at UFC Fight Night, Makhachev versus Green. He came back in August at UFC 278 and knocked out Daniel Da Silva, who appears further up this card, in the first round. So he'll be looking to make it 2 in a row. Standing in his way will be the debuting Salvador. 26-year-old Brazilian is 14-4 overall. He won his way into the UFC with a second-round TKO of Shannon Ross on the Contender Series. He had been scheduled to debut back in October. He was supposed to fight Cleges and Rodriguez. He had to withdraw from that one. Then he was rescheduled for December 10th. He was supposed to fight Daniel Da Silva. Da Silva blew weight so badly that the fight was called off. I mean, he came in at, I think, 130 pounds or something. So third time is the charm as far as actually getting into the octagon, he hopes. And he hopes to keep his streak of octagon success going. He is ever so slightly favored to do so. Salvador minus 120 in his UFC debut. Altamirano minus 110. Or sorry, I had that backwards. No, yeah, sorry. Altamirano minus 110 as the slightest of underdogs. Altamirano lost his UFC debut to Hernandez. I scored the fight for Hernandez. It was a split decision, but I was actually in the minority there, at least on the professional level. You look on MMAdecisions.com, slightly more people scored it for Altamirano than scored it for Hernandez. So I was on the minority side of that one. But the important point is that it was a really close fight. You can make a good argument that Altamirano should be 2-0 in the UFC right now. He is aggressive, comes out at a fast pace. He strikes me as a guy. Well, he doesn't just strike me as a guy. He obviously is a guy because I've watched most of his LFA fights. He is a guy who on the regional level was used to overwhelming people with his aggression and pace. He's equally comfortable striking or grappling. And at the regional level, he was a finisher both on the feet and on the ground. But I think he's going to come up against a wall against UFC level fighters because he's not huge for the division. He's not a super plus athlete, at least by men's flyweight standards. Everybody is fast, but there's like fast and then there's flyweight fast. I mean, he's not flyweight fast. So he's going to have to come up with a little bit more structured game plan here. He's going to have to come up with second ideas for fighters who withstand his onslaught, make it to the end of the first round. And at 32, the clock is kind of ticking for him to do that. This is not a division that is typically kind to the elderly. That makes me interested in this fight against Salvador because Salvador has I mean, I think he has more upside. His weapons are more impressive than Altamirano's, but his weaknesses are also worse. Salvador, he is big for the division. I mean, we've got him listed at 5'9". I don't know if that's true, but on the Contender Series, it looked like it. He's very tall for flyweight. He's kind of flat-footed and shuffly, and his feet are not terribly fast. Unfortunately for him, that adds up to terrible takedown defense. He got taken down a lot on the regional scene by less skilled fighters, but he loves to be in a firefight. He is a bit of a brawler. He has power in both hands. For what it's worth, he uses his length well, but it just means he throws haymakers at range. He doesn't actually use a jab to establish distance, and it got him in trouble. He's remembered for that killer knockout on the Contender Series, but he was getting tuned up by Shannon Ross right before the knockout. Like, it was, if you'd paused it 3 minutes and 30 seconds into that round and said, someone's getting to finish this round, I would have put money on Ross. Ross had him up against the cage. He's just wailing on him with both hands. And Salvador, I mean, he slipped a few punches. He rolled with a few, like a few that might have put him out, didn't quite. And he came back with, I want to say it was a left hook that just sat Ross down, and then he swarmed and finished. But the rope-a-dope is not a viable strategy in 4-ounce gloves. Like,
against a cage.
Like any yeah, like any UFC flyweight worth of salt would have lamped Salvador in that situation. And that makes me worried, because even though I think Salvador, as the younger guy, as a guy with better offensive weapons, better physical tools, has the higher upside, he's kind of built to lose Victor Altamirano's fight. And that's why I'm going with Altamirano in what I guess is the slightest upset here, because even if I think Salvador would tune Altamirano up 2 years from now, right now, I think Altamirano's first round onslaught will probably catch Salvador. So give me Victor Altamirano to ruin the twice postponed UFC debut of Vinicius Salvador. I've got him by first round TKO here. If I'm wrong, I'm going to look real stupid. But in my defense, my second most likely outcome, if I had to rank him, is Salvador knocking Altamirano out in the second or third. Like, it's not that I think Altamirano is 10 times better. I just think it's a style matchup that favors the Mexican, and Altamirano just has much more experience against this level of fighter. So give me Altamirano by first round TKO here.
Claydson and Salvador would have been a hell of a fight.
Oh yeah, talk about a couple of Beyblades, just drop them in there. Yeah,
those, like, just, geez, that would have been freaking nuts. One of them would have probably missed weight, and like, can we just make flyweight 127? By the way, like, I don't think anyone cares, because
they're small. Just don't
like, like, I know I don't want to go down the road of like new weight classes, all that shit, but like, can we just give like men's flyweight? Because that would, the only reason why I say that is because that would make everyone's career like 2 years longer too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean,
like,
it makes me wonder how different Demetrius Johnson's career would have been if he'd had to fight like just a couple pounds heavier guys, because everything shifted for him when he was able to drop from 135 to 125. So it kind of makes me wonder. I wouldn't want to ruin that. Otherwise, I'm down with your plan.
I think about stuff like that every once in a while. I'm like, well, like, just look at Figgy. Like, you could tell the years of weight cut have like just caught up to him. And if you could just give the guy 2 more pounds, anyway. So I wanted to ask you, like, is Altamirano a wrestler, or is he a striker, or is he an MMA guy? Like, is he a Robert Whittaker kind of dude? Like, where he just kind of can do everything? I mean, I'm not calling him Robert Whittaker, but like, is he that kind of guy where like, just a, like a Leatherman, a multi-tool of just different kind of things he can do? Like, what do you see Altamirano as?
If he's a Leatherman that has like the fish scaler, like just folded out from the handle, and it's just left that way. It's like, well, we'll go with that first, but I've got other tools if we need them. Yeah. I mean, not to draw, well, I will draw stereotypes. This isn't a racial stereotype. This is a regional MMA stereotype. He's Mexican, you know. Now he does train out of Dallas Fort Worth,
Sure.
but he's not a wrestler. He's a striker who learned to wrestle. Now at this point, I think he's well rounded. You know, he doesn't have any obvious skill deficiencies, but he is a striker first who knows how to wrestle.
I just think that he's probably going to wrestle in this fight, man.
It might
Like,
be a
he'd be
good route to
almost
victory.
stupid not to. Like, looking at Salvador's, if you do any, like, doing any tape study on him, like, you can pressure him against the cage, and like, that's where you can take people down and kind of bully him. And Altamirano's pretty tough. And he does kind of like to bully people. Like, that's kind of his thing, where he really likes to go. And, you know, just like you said, you know, coming up before the UFC, I mean, he beat Candelario like in his like contender series fight. And I think that was the only contender series fight where two dudes got a contract, right?
Well, up through that year,
Up through that,
you know,
so,
now it's become a little more common, but yeah.
like, and Salvador's dangerous. Like you said, he's live by the sword, die by the sword, but like, he's trading 4 or 5 live by the swords for 1 die by the sword. But he is getting in trouble. Like, he's been in trouble in fights. It's impressive when you can have the composure. We were talking about Dustin Poirier before we started recording. Salvador isn't Dustin Poirier.
Nope.
Like, I don't know. Like, you can, you know, you could shoot a 12-gauge shotgun at Dustin Poirier at this point, and I don't know if he'd be too worried. You know, is a bird shot, or like,
I mean, you know, kind of get the shoulder up high, roll with a few of the pellets. He'd be okay.
And I just don't know how, especially in his contender series fight, Salvador, where he's just kind of getting really, really teed off on. I think Altamirano can just kind of pressure him and just grapple him. Like, I really think Altamirano is going to use his wrestling here. And he'd be stupid not to. And then, just like you said, second, you know, 1A and 1B. 1B is Salvador knocks him out. And if you're a gambling man, maybe betting this fight doesn't go the distance. Something worth looking at.
I think that's probably, you know,
Probably
again, we're not a betting show, but if I were inclined to drop a prop on something like Salvador by knockout, even though, again, I don't think that's the most likely outcome, it probably gets you like a better price will definitely get you a better price than the straight money line, or this thing not to go to the judges like as well. But what's your actual pick for the fight?
I'm going to go with Altamirano. I think he is going to use his wrestling. From what I've seen in Salvador, I've just seen him get out wrestled. I've seen him get taken down over and over again. And, you know, if Altamirano can stay tough and just grapple for 2 rounds and not get knocked out in the third, like, that's how you win this fight.
Okay. So are you thinking decision?
Yeah, I'm thinking decision.
We head now to the lightweight division for a matchup between Manuel Torres and Trey Ogden. Torres, the 27-year-old Mexican, is 13-2 overall. He's 1-0 since joining the UFC out of the 2021 season of Dana White's Contender Series. He won his way into the UFC with a first-round TKO of Colton England, then made his debut last May at UFC on ESPN Blachowicz versus Rakic, where he knocked out Frank Camacho in the first round as well. He, in fact, has first-round finishes in his last 4 fights. 2 submissions, 2 knockouts. He will look to keep those good vibes going at the expense of Ogden. The 33-year-old Kansas City native is 16-5 overall. He is 1-1 since joining the UFC as a veteran of the Dana White Looking for a Fight series. He was at Fury FC 53 back in November of 2021 down here in Texas. Impressed the UFC boss enough that he got the call up, where he made his debut at UFC on ESPN Luque versus Muhammad 2 last April, dropped the split decision to Jordan Levitt. He came back in September at UFC Fight Night Sandhagen versus Song and took a unanimous decision over Daniel Zellhuber. So he is looking to make it 2 in a row in the UFC. He is not favored to do so. Torres is minus 165 or so on most betting outlets. Ogden around plus 140 on the comeback. There's good news and there's bad news about both of these guys. The good news about Torres, as I said while introducing him is that he's coming into this fight on the back of two straight first round TKOs of Colton England on the Contender Series, then Camacho in the UFC. That's the good news. The bad news is that in the Colton England fight on the Contender Series, there was one of the nastiest eye pokes I saw all of that year that preceded the knockout by 45 seconds or so. And in negligent, flagrant, accidental, it was absolutely fight altering. Like, England was out of that fight as soon as it happened. And
I remember
as much as
that, it was bad.
And as much as I like Colton England personally, Colton England is a cancer survivor, a Houston guy, a former Fury lightweight champ. Jury's still out on whether Colton England is UFC material.
Yeah.
The jury is not out on Frank Camacho. We know that Frank Camacho is not UFC material. So while Torres ran right through him, he ran right through the guy that literally might have been the lowest level lightweight in the UFC right now. The UFC lightweight division, other divisions have sort of caught up. 135, 145 are both incredible now, but it's still in the team photo for the deepest division in the UFC. There aren't many Colton England, Frank Camacho types left for Manuel Torres to fight. So his quick strike finish game, where, I mean, almost all of his fights in his entire career have been first round knockouts or first round submissions. It's not going to work indefinitely. He is not a perfect fighter, and we need to see what it looks like when he runs into somebody with UFC level tools that he can't just blow right through in 3 minutes. Ogden, for the flaws he has, at least represents that. Now, I said,
no, I mean, like, I'm sorry to cut you off, but like, Trey Ogden looked really good. I don't like, he was supposed to get crushed by Zellhuber. And for a submission guy, like, he made a lot of improvements in his striking.
I agree. He made
like, I was surprised.
He made major improvements in his striking, which is good, because I said there's good and bad news about both these guys. The good news about Ogden is that in his UFC debut, he spent a good chunk of the fight on the ground with Jordan Levitt and held his own quite capably.
Yeah.
The bad news is that he got outstruck by Jordan Levitt. Like, Jordan Levitt, Keith's like immortal one-liner aside, still is one of the most flawed strikers in the UFC. And Levitt took at least one round off Ogden with nothing but leg kicks. Like, luckily, he did look better in the Zellhuber fight. Against all odds, Ogden made impressive strides at Glory MMA and Fitness, even while the building was burning down around him. Now, we have him listed at Marathon MMA, which is his own gym in Greater Kansas City. Like, that's the one that he runs. And that's what that from just his recent posts and training footage, that looks like where he's basing his training out of. I don't know who he's bringing in terms of training partners, but he already strikes me as a guy that's got a future in coaching after this.
Yeah.
He's one of those guys that he's already hanging at a UFC level without any standout physical tools other than being, kind of tall for a lightweight. But here, he's shown that he can survive against faster, younger, harder hitting fighters like Zellhuber. As far as like taking control of a fight, that has always worked best for him when he's been the better wrestler and able to bring the fight to the ground when he needs to, when he hasn't liked what he's been getting on the feet, for him to have that safety valve, or for him to just go on offense and take a fighter down that he knows is vulnerable on the ground. I mean, you look at his record. See, he's got 16 wins, 11 of them are by submission, tons of rear naked chokes. He's a long-limbed guy who's good at taking the back, sinking the hooks, body triangle, and choking people out. Against Torres, if he could do that, that would make me sit up and take notice in this division. Torres, because Torres, kind of like Zellhuber, is a guy he's younger, he hits much harder. Torres isn't a perfect striker.
He's athletic though.
And he's much more athletic than Ogden. But this feels like a trap fight to me.
I'm with you.
If Ogden makes it to the end of the first round, I'm worried about Torres. Without looking at Torres's record, I think he's been to the third round once, and it was in a fight that he was largely dominating. And anybody has decent cardio if they're winning without putting out much effort. Like, BJ Penn only gassed out in his losses, and he always had the famously flawed cardio. No, he had plenty of cardio as long as he was kicking your ass. I'm going to like sound stupid for this pick if Torres comes out and just lights Ogden up in the first round. But Manuel Torres he's an interim gym guy. He's a training, probably not partner because, they're 3 weight classes apart, but he's a longtime teammate of Brandon Moreno. And he still fights kind of like early career wild Brandon Moreno.
Sure.
But he's not Moreno in terms of skills, in terms of athleticism. And I think this is the fight where it's going to cost him. Kind of like I said about Altamirano and Salvador, Torres has much more upside. Trey Ogden's probably as good as he's ever going to be right now, whereas Torres could continue to improve and maybe a loss or two will even help him get there. But yeah, I think this is a super trap fight for Manuel Torres. Give me Torres to win the first round, maybe hurt Ogden some, but to start to slow down. If he slows down to the point where Ogden can take him down, we're in all kinds of trouble because Ogden will just, Ogden will just kind of do the Damon Jackson thing, just survive, then take him down, and it'll be the Python or Anaconda routine where he squeezes the life out of a tired Torres. Give me Ogden by third round submission here in a moderate upset.
I also feel like Ogden's game is a lot more of like a veteran style game.
Oh goodness, yes.
If
I'm comparing him to Damon Jackson, we're definitely in veteran territory there.
He's just, and Torres's only losses, number one, are via submission, but they're both weird. One of them is heel hook, one of them is via knee bar, which those are like leg locking, like those are bad ways to lose fights. Like it's just tough when getting choked out's never fun, but like when you lose via heel hook or knee bar, hopefully it's not the same leg.
Yeah.
Because you probably don't have a knee. But I'm with you. I think Trey Ogden showed me enough in his last fight where, again, did Zellhuber just not show up? We don't really know. But Trey Ogden was a big underdog in that fight. He was supposed to get cooked. His striking looks like it came along enough. I think he can hang tough. It's like a sneaky underdog trap fight here for a guy that's just a vet that can lean on his grappling skill. I think Torres, could very well go out there and just hit him in the head with Thor's hammer and fucking, eliminate him, or get tired in trying to do that. And then, maybe get laid on for round 2. And then maybe 2.5 minutes into round 3, he makes a mistake. And when you make a mistake against a grappler, someone that's got a lot of submissions and rear naked chokes, like we watched Valentina Shevchenko make one mistake. Yes, this is at the highest level, but you make one mistake deep into a fight against someone that can grapple and submit you, like you may get choked out. You may get stuck in a body triangle, and then things change.
So what's your pick for this one?
Gonna go with the underdog. I think Ogden gets it done. I could even see him doing it by like round 3 submission. Sneaky, sneaky trap fight. Like you said, it's weird because I've only got to watch to do tape study on this. Admittedly, this is one where I was pretty familiar with Trey Ogden. I watched the Contender Series fight again. I know he knocked out Camacho, and the eye poke, man. And then Frank Camacho, like, what is that? Like, could you go to your local middle school and beat up every kid in that middle school? Yes. Like what does that tell you about you as a fighter? Nothing.
Frank, the toughest kid at the middle school, Camacho. So what's your actual prediction for method and round here?
I'm going round 3 submission.
Okay. Next up at UFC on ESPN 43, we return to the men's flyweight division for a matchup between CJ Vergara and Daniel da Silva. Vergara, the 31-year-old Texan and the only San Antonio native on the San Antonio card, so good for him, is 10-4-1 overall. He is 1-2 since joining the UFC as a winner on Dana White's Contender Series and a former Fury Fighting Championship flyweight champ. He beat Bruno Mesquita on the Contender Series with a knee to the body in like 40 seconds back in September of 2021 to win his way into the UFC. Since then, it has been rough sledding for the Texan. He debuted dropping a unanimous decision to Ode Osborne at UFC 268 in November of 2021. Came back and won a split decision over Cleges and Rodriguez at UFC 274 this past May. Then came back from there in October at UFC Fight Night, Grasso versus Araujo, where he got armbarred in the second round by Tatsuro Taira. Even worse than the two losses are the fact that he blew weight badly for both of those fights, missed weight by at least 2 pounds over the non-title limit for both. I think he was 139.5 for the Taira fight. So despite the fact that he has only lost one fight since his last win, there's the outside possibility that Vergara is fighting for his job here. In the case of his opponent, Da Silva, that is more than a possibility, as the man they call Miojo, that is a brand of instant ramen that is apparently popular in Brazil, has had extremely rough sledding since joining the promotion. 26-year-old from Brazil is 11-4 overall. He is 0-3 since joining the UFC late in 2021. Those 3 losses, all finishes, all within 6 minutes. He debuted against Jeff Molina, got pounded out early in the second round, came back last April against Francisco Figueiredo at UFC on ESPN Font versus Vera, got knee barred in 1 minute and 18 seconds. Third time was not the charm, as he showed up against Victor Altamirano at UFC 278 in August and got knocked out late in the first round. So at least on paper, Da Silva has not been very competitive. If he doesn't pull out of that funk here, there's very likely he's going to get yoinked. And he is not the favorite. Unsurprisingly, Vergara is minus 255 or so. Da Silva plus 215 on the comeback. Here's the thing. Daniel Da Silva, obviously, he has underperformed badly just compared to the eyeball test, because coming to the UFC out of like Shudo Brazil and a couple other mid-level Brazilian promotions, he's 25 years old. Yeah,
he was a killer.
He was a killer, and he looked like the exact kind of guy that might be able to keep up that level of performance in the UFC. He checked off all the boxes. Just 24 years old at the time. By the eyeball test, I mean, he looks like you want your UFC flyweight champ to look. I mean, he's a jacked little guy. He is pretty athletic. He is a teammate of Charles de Bronx Oliveira. I mean, he's got the trademark shoot a box of Diego Lima bleached hair. You're like, oh, this guy is, I didn't say punch his ticket to a future top 15 spot in the flyweight division, but I was very excited to see him. Yeah. And the best I can say about him through 3 fights is that he's done a few impressive things in isolated spots here and there in the midst of losing badly 3 times. Like, that's it. Like, if you scored each individual minute as a round, he might have lost every minute of every fight he's been in the UFC. It's been rough sledding for him. And I'm not sure what to pin it down on, except that he's not quite as fast and explosive as he looked in Brazil, and insert your own potential reasons why there. And also his defensive lapses that he got away with against low-level fighters in Brazil, mid-level UFC flyweights have punished him for, and he's not had the chin to withstand it. Like Molina and Altamirano both cleaned this clock with both clean shots where they went first, and also just countered him badly as he'd like throw punches, not bring his hands back, throw naked like kicks down low. They've just punished him.
Yeah, his problem is that, like, and I think it's a Shudo box problem in general, where like you need to stop training every fighter like Charles Oliveira. Where like, you know, like he makes Shudo box mistakes. I think that's what loses him a lot of his fights, is like defensive lapses, and he just makes a lot of mistakes De Silva.
Mhm.
To where like a guy like Charles Oliveira, like he's a dog. He's, he literally like it's an overused term, but he's got that dog in him. Like
Mhm.
he is just built different. Plus he has a really high level BJJ game that he's built over his MMA career that he can kind of fall back on.
Yeah.
Where like this is what happens when you like try to it's a lot of those guys, they all have that same like pressure forward, all offense, makes mistakes, but like they're not all Charles Oliveira. I think that's been De Silva's big problem. And I cut you off and you haven't talked about Vergara yet, but Vergara's mistakes come on the scale, number one, and number two, he's just like he is he the worst athlete at flyweight in the UFC?
I was definitely going to say he's the slowest flyweight in that division. And I mean, that's 80% of what we talk about when we talk about athleticism is just, how fast your hands and feet are, how fast you can get from one place to the other, how fast you can get your fist from chambered to the other guy's chin, occasionally how high you can jump, and, with how little like telegraphing of it. On all those, Vergara comes in at or near the bottom. Like that's where I was going to go next, is that if there's a winnable fight for Daniel De Silva in the UFC, it might be Vergara. We're talking about a guy who is a minus athlete, again, by the standards of the division. If you took him and just used an anti-shrink ray and made him 240 pounds, he comes in dead center of the UFC heavyweight division in athleticism, but he's the worst at flyweight. And on top of that, he has, again, 2 bad weight misses in 3 fights. A flyweight missing weight by 3 pounds is like a light heavyweight missing by 5 or 6. It's not good. And that tells you that, okay, if he makes weight, he's probably pretty dehydrated, and you have to be concerned about his gas tank late. You have to be concerned about his chin from the opening bell. I understand why the line is what it is, because Vergara has shown a few things and De Silva has not. But if there's a winnable fight for De Silva in the UFC, it's this one. It's Vergara. It's De Silva either blitzing him early and just treating him like he treated people in like Mr. Cage or Shudo Brazil a couple years ago, or it's De Silva getting out of the first round for once and discovering that, hey, I actually have a decent gas tank and this guy's more tired than I am. I'm not picking the upset here, even though Vergara is fighting at home and presumably eating that home cooking. If Vergara comes in 4 pounds heavy, all bets are off. But here, just De Silva has not shown me he does anything at a UFC level. I can't imagine that magically changing here. He might just need to go back for some extra seasoning. And I don't say that as a joke because he's nicknamed after ramen. Just needs a different seasoning packet. I don't know. But give me Vergara to beat De Silva. And considering that everyone who's beaten De Silva in the UFC has finished him and finished him spectacularly, give me Vergara to knock him out. Just De Silva will make some bad blunder on the feet in the first round. Vergara will drop him. While he's not fast, he does hit very hard and he does throw good volume. Just a lot of artillery coming the way of De Silva's chin. Something's going to find it. Give me Vergara by TKO or even a clean knockout late in the first round.
One thing Vergara has is he's tough as shit. Like he is tough as shit. Like his fight with Clayton run, like he got his ass kicked a lot in that fight. And he hasn't been match made very kindly. Like, say what you want about Ode Osborne, but like Ode Osborne is pretty freaking good. Mm-hmm. Clayton Rodriguez is pretty freaking good.
Tatsuro Taira
might be really freaking good.
Tatsuro Taira might be the best flyweight in the prospect in the division right now. While we're arguing about Mokaev and Hadley at UFC London last week, the guy that might be fighting for a title in 2 years, for all we know, it might be Taira.
Yeah, right now I'd probably put him above Mokaev.
Especially if they catch the tap when Mokaev taps the first time and doesn't tell anybody.
I watched that.
You didn't think it was a tap?
He had that shoulder injury. It looked like his shoulder was getting cranked on weird. Like, it wasn't a phantom tap. Like I saw him tap his body. Was it a submissive tap?
He tapped him like 5 or 6 times, man.
Or was it him being like, good job, you know, but like, you know what I mean? Like you don't tap your other opponent regardless. Like, you know,
yeah.
I don't know how to feel about that. Like, I really don't.
Anyway, I didn't want to pull us down that rabbit hole. Like, talk to me about Vergara.
I think De Silva's gonna come out here and really try to like throw a hailstorm of offense at Vergara. And I think some of it might work for like 2 minutes and 45 seconds, maybe 3 minutes. But he just makes so many mistakes, and Vergara does throw with heat. I think he's just going to catch him with something, especially if it goes into the second round. Like, typically you would think, okay, they're going back into their corners, they're going to get refreshed. But, like, you know, this might look like a Makwan Americani type performance to where, like, yeah, he, you know, since Vergara is so slow and De Silva so, you know, I would say he's a lot more athletic. He's a lot faster. He might just go out there and hit him with a hailstorm of shit. I think just Vergara is going to hang tough and probably club him with something, probably hurt him. I could see a club and sub here. But he'll probably just hurt him and then finish him TKO. I'm going to go round 2 TKO. Just ground and pound.
Giles, the 30-year-old Houstonian. He was actually born in San Antonio, but has lived in Houston most of his life. Anyway, 15-4 overall. He is 6-4 in the UFC in a trek that has taken him across 3 different weight divisions at this point. He started at light heavyweight. His last fight in LFA before joining the UFC, he beat Ryan Spann, dude.
So weird.
Anyway, he's 1-0 at light heavyweight, 4-3 at middleweight, and 1-1 since dropping to welterweight. He lost his last fight at middleweight to Dricus du Plessis back in July of 2021. Moved down to 170, came back last January at UFC 270 and got knocked out in the first round by Michael Morales. In September, he fought at UFC Fight Night Sandhagen versus Song and took a unanimous, if somewhat excruciating to watch, decision over Louis Cosi. So he'll be looking to make it 2 in a row. Standing in his way is Parsons. 27-year-old Floridian is 10-3 overall. He is 1-1 in the UFC. Made a short notice debut in July of 2021 against Daniel Rodriguez, getting knocked out late in the first round. Returned from that last April and fought Evan Elder, taking a unanimous decision over him. That was UFC Fight Night, Lemos versus Andrade. So almost a year on from his last appearance, Parsons is back, looking to make it 2 in a row as well. Odds here are extremely close, but Giles is just the slightest of favorites. He's minus 115, Parsons 110 or so. Dev, who you got in this fight and how?
I don't have to tell you about Trevin Giles, but for the listeners, like, go to SureDog.com and go look at this guy's record. Like, he's fought everyone. Like, Brendan Allen, Ryan Spann, Ike Villanueva. Like, these are guys before the UFC. I mean, he's fought Zach Cummings. He's fought Gerald Mearshart. He's fought James Krause, Roman Dolidze, Dricus du Plessis. You know, even in his last loss to Michael Morales, who is, you know, like a pretty highly touted prospect, like, he's good. Look at Dricus du Plessis. I mean, say what you want about Dricus du Plessis, but like, he's climbing the rankings. He's winning fights. He did lose both of those fights by finish. However, prior to that, before, you know, his last win before Cosi was against Roman Dolidze. Like, look where Dolidze's at right now. Someone might have scored the fight against Marvin Vettori this past weekend for him. Like, Trevin Giles has fought a lot of really good dudes. And he's beat a lot of really good dudes. His game is his Cosi fight was, you know, I'll just say it was dreadful to watch. But when you win fights, you keep your contract and you get paid double. So I'll never hate on a fighter doing whatever they need to do to win a fight. This one here against Parsons definitely got dealt a really bad hand, having to come in and fight D-Rod on short notice. Especially D-Rod then. D-Rod now seems to be starting to get plagued by injuries and might not be looking the same as he was before. But then, I mean, D-Rod was cooking with gas back then at that point. Like, that's a tough dude to come in, you know, make a debut on short notice. And he paid for it, you know. It kind of reminded me of like a Tabitha Ricci debut where like that just probably shouldn't have happened, you know. I think Tabitha Ricci probably has higher upside than Preston Parsons. But then, you know, in a weird karma type way, he went and got Evan Elder kind of on short notice in his second fight. So that, and Evan Elder is good, but he's a 55er and he's kind of small. I do think Evan Elder kind of got shafted in his last fight, but that's besides the point. Evan Elder is good. Parsons is a grappler. That's what he likes to do. And that's kind of what he did there. Surprised that he wasn't able to submit Elder, being the bigger guy and the more athletic guy and the more powerful guy. But again, I think now if you watch Evan Elder, that could probably tell you why, because he's probably a lot better than we thought at that point. Trevin Giles, he is a vet. And we were talking about it before we started recording, but like, he's not a cop anymore. Like, he can focus on training. I think he's just going to be able to avoid the grappling. And even if he has the same fight he did against Louis Cosi, like, all he needs to do is avoid the grappling and put a jab in Parsons' face. Like, Parsons got jabbed to death and countered to death. Like, everything D-Rod did worked against Parsons. And if Giles can take 30% of that and defend takedowns and avoid grappling, he can win this fight. I just think we're going to see a veteran performance out of Giles. I think he's going to win a decision.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about Parsons first. Parsons is a guy that obviously he made a very short notice debut against Daniel Rodriguez, and that was a huge ask because, I mean, even now, Daniel Rodriguez is like 7-2 in the UFC. Yeah, he came up short against Neil Magny, but he's still, like, if we mapped it out, he's probably on the outskirts of the top 15 in that division. That's a huge ask for Parsons, stepping up from literally combat night in North Florida, which is not an ultra high level promotion. But even at the time, he's someone that Keith and I both said, this is someone that we wouldn't have been surprised to see on the Contender Series, if not in the UFC within the next 12 to 18 months anyway. So he's one of those types, like David Onama is the name that always comes to mind for me, where, oh, well, he's getting the call a little sooner than I expected, but this is a guy I was excited about already. So he gets a pass on the Rodriguez fight. And then, as you mentioned, the Elder fight, it's almost the flip side. He should have dominated that fight, and he did. He's a real fun guy to watch. If you look at his record, if you're looking at his record underneath our faces right now, you see he has 10 wins, 9 are by submission. That probably makes you picture in your mind a grappling specialist. And in a certain sense of the word, he is, but he isn't Hani Yahya. He's not this guy that's just clueless on the feet and miserable if he can't get the fight down. Parsons comes out like a house on fire, throwing tons of punches. Just in his case, they are a means to an end. He's looking to get you to bring your hands up, or he's looking to sting you with something and get you reeling so we can get in on your hips, or so we can get a body lock, drag you to the ground, and then do what he really wants to do, which is take your back, rear naked choke, slide to mount, peel off for an arm bar. Like, that's his game. But when you see the beginning, the first 60 seconds of any Preston Parsons fight, you're like, where's the grappling specialist? Because he just comes out wailing with haymakers.
He's looking to club.
Yeah.
He is looking to club someone.
He is definitely looking to club someone, or at the very least, just get them uncomfortable enough that he can get it to the ground where he is very comfortable. I don't know what his belt rank is. I don't know what sort of out of the cage credentials he has. I don't know much competition he's done, but he just feels like a veteran grappler, especially for a 27-year-old guy with barely a dozen fights. Like, as soon as he's on the ground, you can just see him relax. His opponent, whatever they're doing, is definitely getting tired before him. He is for as wild as he is on the feet, he's pretty calculated and measured on the ground. He advances position smoothly. He's looking for submissions without sacrificing position. He throws enough ground and pound to either keep from being stood up or to make his opponent open up and let him pass guard or take the back. He very, very good grappler. All that said, I think Trevin Giles is a big ask for him. Trevin Giles, I know his nickname is The Problem, and I know Kama Worthy was in the UFC and his nickname was the Death Star, but Trevin Giles is the real Death Star, because the Death Star in the Star Wars movies was this space station that had unstoppable offense, but had a little thermal exhaust port just right below the main port that if you hit it, it would just all blow up and boom. That's Trevin Giles. Trevin Giles, in all of his fights, has a couple of lapses, just bad lapses defensively or in fight IQ. And if his opponent is good enough to take advantage of them, Giles loses, and usually loses spectacularly. If they are too tired to take advantage, they don't have the offensive skills, they don't have the presence of mind, their coach isn't yelling at them, then Giles wins. And he usually wins pretty easily. Giles, and Dev already sort of alluded to this, but Giles is almost the opposite of what Brian Ortega used to be. Because Brian Ortega, through his first 7 or 8 UFC fights, he was like 7-1 with 1 no contest, or 7-0 with 1 no contest, and he had not won a single round. He was losing every single one of his fights until he either knocked them out or submitted them. Like all the way up through the Clay Guida fight, all the way up through when he got into the title picture. Because that was Ortega. He just didn't have the type of skills to be a round winner, but he was an incredibly opportunistic finisher. So one of my favorite stats. Like Brian Ortega went undefeated in his first 8 UFC fights without winning a single round. Giles is the opposite. Giles has been winning every single one of his fights until he loses. Going all the way back. I mean, if you go all the way back to Zach Cummings, like 4 years ago, that was a pretty even fight, but he was beating Gerald Meerschaert until he got guillotined in the 3rd round. He won the first round against Dricus du Plessis. Then he got clocked. Michael Morales fight, if you stop that fight halfway through the round, Giles is winning. By minute 4, Morales had lamped him. That's Trevin Giles. I don't know if it'll ever get fixed. He's 30 years old, which at welterweight isn't especially old. He's with a good team, and I say that with a certain amount of bias, as Jeremy Mann is one of my favorite people in the sport, but he's with a proven team that has like lots of excellent training partners and training for him. So there's a chance that he can even just close up the little exhaust port. But if he doesn't, it's still not everybody who can take advantage of that, because everything else Giles has. He is one of the better strikers at 170 offensively, and except for those few lapses, defensively. He is a very good offensive wrestler. Like, look, he just washed Louis Cosi with wrestling. He's perfectly comfortable as a submission artist. The people that have submitted him, it's been opportunistic stuff like Gerald Meerschaert doing the Meerschaert guillotine. It's not like people have just run over him on the ground. He's got all the offensive tools. He's generally defensively very sound. He's got all the tools to be a top 10 fighter at 170, but at 170, where I mentioned this off the intro, you sometimes have to win 5, 6, 7, 8 fights in a row to get into the title picture. Somebody with Giles's inconsistency problem has a serious problem. You can luck your way into 3 or 4 wins in a row, and in some divisions that's enough. At welterweight, it isn't. So he's stuck in an interesting place. And I do find it a little interesting that he dropped in weight, because none of his losses in the UFC were due to being the smaller guy. And in fact, he beat Dolidze because he was the fresher guy in the 3rd round. His gas tank actually helped him there. He knows his body better than I do. He and his trainers, his handlers. So if he keeps winning at 170, that's great. But here, I'm leaning Giles, but based on skill, I always lean Giles. I just know I'm going to be wrong about 1 time out of 3. Give me Giles in this one. Parsons is going to come out winging punches. Giles, especially in the first round, is usually sound enough. He's going to slip those. He's not going to get fooled. I don't think Parsons can take Giles down unless Giles is hurt. So I expect that this will be a fight where against Kosi, Giles saw the best route to victory as just, I'm going to shoot takedowns, take this guy down, make him tired, win the fight, no risk to myself. Here, I think he probably thinks his best route to victory is to keep Parsons on the feet, just outbox him. Giles as a striker, orthodox. 4 years ago, I would have called him a boxer who kicks. Now I think he's more of a balanced kickboxer. He punctuates most of his combos with a hard low kick. All of those are good things against Parsons. He's a more composed striker. He has more one-shot power. And at least when he's winning the fight, like he did against Kosi, he has plenty of gas at 170. So give me Giles to win a pretty dominant decision here, for Parsons to be pretty frustrated. But if there's the Trevin Giles moment and Parsons has the presence of mind to take advantage, anything can happen, and the wheels all fall off for Giles. But yeah, I'll take Giles by decision here.
I don't think Parsons is the guy that's going to make him pay for cutting to 170 either. Like when it comes to like cracking him real good, like there may come a time where he fights someone at 170 that just makes him, regardless of him making a mistake or not, just has a lot of punching power. And when you are cutting weight, like eventually, I don't think Parsons is that guy though. Just like you said with Trevin Giles, man, like going back to the Silva, like the mistakes, like at the UFC level, like you just cannot. Mistakes are not, like hitting a curb when you're driving your car. Like that's a mistake. Like in the UFC, it's like driving into a semi.
Yeah.
So, and I think maybe him being able to be a full-time fighter is going to help him really, fix those mistakes, because a lot of his losses come from mistakes. And, mentally, mindset, and I don't want to get into the mindset of a fighter, but, telling yourself, I'm not the better fighter, I lost because I'm not as good, or I lost because I made a mistake. Like, it's probably better to tell yourself you lost because you made a mistake. Yeah. Like, all I need to do is just tweak this. I mean, we saw that happen with Usman and Leon, and like Usman still lost. But I do think Trevin Giles' losses do come from a lot of mistakes. And the second he fixes that, like, who knows where his ceiling is? Maybe not the title shot, but like, could he be in the top 15? Could he go out there and just have a clean fight and not make mistakes against someone in the top 15? Sure.
I mean, again, he beat Roman Dolidze. Roman Dolidze is in the middleweight top 10 right now.
Yeah. And can throw hammers. He is a guy that would make you pay for cutting. You know what I mean? Like Dolidze can bang. And he hung out with Duplessis, who could clearly bang. Yes, he got caught, but that was by a mistake, I'm curious to see this. I just think it's going to be a veteran performance. I think it's going to be a 3-round decision for Giles, man. I'm kind of all over that.
Next up on the UFC San Antonio prelims is a featherweight matchup between Steven Peterson and Lucas Alexander. Peterson, the 32-year-old Texas native, is 19-10 overall. He is 3-4 since joining the UFC as a veteran of the first season of Dana White's Contender Series. I won't say a graduate, because he actually lost on the Contender Series, went back and won one fight in LFA, and then got signed. Since then, as I said, 3-4. He lost his last time out. It was a split decision against Julian Erosa last February at UFC Fight Night Hermansson versus Strickland, which was made even worse by the fact that Peterson missed weight. Prior to that, he had back-to-back wins over Chase Hooper and Martin Bravo. So Peterson will look to get right with the scale and get back in the win column against Alexander, a man still looking for his first UFC win. The 27-year-old Brazilian is 7-3 overall. He is 0-1 in the UFC. He debuted last October at UFC Fight Night Grasso versus Araujo, where he got choked out in the first round by Joanderson Brito. So he still looking for his first octagon win, not favored to do so. Alexander is plus 150 as the underdog. Peterson around minus 175 as the favorites. Dev, who you like in this one? How do you see the fight going? Who wins?
Man, I feel bad for Peterson. He got shafted out of that win bonus too, or that performance of the night bonus. Arosa took home 100 grand outside of his fight person that fight. What a bloody fight too. Like Peterson showed he's a freaking dog in that fight, man. And it's Arosa's such a weird dude. Like, you know, sidebar, but like you get murdered by Caceres in like one shot, but then you have a war with Peterson. What the fuck? You know, it's just weird. What a fun guy.
What's up, Enum Claw, Washington?
Yeah, shout out. It's on the other side of the state for me, but you know, I could drive there. Lucas Alexander, you know, he lost against Joanderson Brito. And like there's no shame in that. Joanderson Brito is one of those like super athletic Brazilian dudes that can kind of just like do everything and like do it with the pedal on the floor.
Yes.
Like everything Brito does is just, you know, he's just
it's
like
turned up to 11.
Yeah, like he is just, I don't know another way to, he is just full speed ahead, like always, grueling pace, always. Love him or hate him, but like that's what he does. So like kind of, you know, no shame in that type of loss. His fights before this were like win via arm injury under Anthony Pettis FC #1, which is like, that's red flaggy for me. Lucas Alexander, he's another one of those guys where like if you look at his record, like in 2019 he was fighting under Square Ring Promotions, under Islands Fights. Was his fight against Joanderson Brito a short notice bout? Seems very short noticey, like based off of his record, you know. He's all of his losses come via submission. He's lost via armbar. He's got a couple losses via rear naked choke. But he will bang, like, you know, he's
okay. Against Joanderson Brito, it was supposed to be Melsik Bagdasaryan. He broke his hand in camp, and Alexander stepped in, not on like 24 hours notice, but it was like a couple weeks out. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. He does have good power though. And like Peterson being a smaller guy at this weight class and missing weight, kind of, you know, could pose some problems. I do kind of think Peterson is just that old dog. He's at home. He's in Texas. This is a big fight for him. Like he is an OG on that scene over there. He is coming, you know, he did lose that fight. It was a pretty close fight against Arosa. Fight of the night. Anytime there's a fight of the night, you know, it's probably a pretty close fight. I'm glad he was back in February, I believe. So it's been over a year. I'm glad he took the time off because that fight was brutal. Like, didn't he have like a big chunk of like the top of his head? Like he got really like,
it was
like
gross.
Like that boy needed some stitches. Like he was, and his record isn't that pretty, but again, you know, like prior to the UFC, like he lost against Leandro Higo. Like Leandro Higo's
very good fighter. Yep.
Like Benito Lopez, like that's when he lost on the Contender Series against Benito Lopez. Like that was via split decision. You know, Benito Lopez did just come and get cooked by Bautista, but like prior to that, like Benito Lopez is undefeated. Like he's not bad. Brendan Davis, you know, that was back in 2018. But he's fought a lot of dudes. Like, you never forget the Martin Bravo, like the viral moment that's his, like, that's his. I mean, I don't think he'll ever get any better than that, quite frankly. But Peterson can kind of just do everything. And he's just such a dog, man. Him being at home, I think they're trying to give him a fight he can win here. I think the UFC wants him to win a fight at home in Texas. You know, he's got a... You don't see many guys in the UFC with a record of 19-10, you know, but his fights are fun. They're bloody. Look at his last fight. Can't cut a guy off a loss like that, even though he didn't deserve to be because he was coming off of 2 wins before that. His Chase Hooper win, like that's impressive. Like Chase Hooper was like really highly touted at that point in 2021.
Yep.
Like they thought that was a fight for Chase Hooper to go win. And he showed his veteran ability to, avoid grappling and just punish him. He hits hard. He's durable. I think he's going to go out there and just be a dog and win this fight. I don't think he gets a finish, but I do think him at home in Texas, the crowd's going to be behind him. I think he's just going to kind of get into a war and win it. That's what I see happening.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you laid down there. And I feel like this is at least the third fight on this card so far where I've said that the younger guy might have UFC upside and might even have more upside.
Sure.
But this is probably going to be too much too soon. Lucas Alexander just doesn't look ready for the UFC to me. Nothing on that win streak in square on like island fights and combat night made me think he was ready for UFC level material. He is unlike Preston Parsons. He is not a guy that was already on my radar because, combat night and island fights are not the top tier promotions in Florida. Like the guys that are UFC ready in Florida are fighting for Titan or, they're going out of state and fighting for someone like LFA.
Sure.
And he has impressive physical tools. If he were a little better at everything, he might be more like a Joe Anderson Brito, honestly. A guy that he's a little wild and he doesn't have the connective tissue bringing all his individual skills together, but he's just capable of knocking out or submitting people really quickly because he's fast, strong, aggressive. He could be the poor man's Joe Anderson Brito, but at this point, he's not even the homeless man's Joe Anderson Brito. He's just not quite ready for the UFC yet. And you know what? He's got 10 career fights and he's 27 years old. That shouldn't be that surprising. And I want to say he only even relocated to Florida and started training at Fusion XL like 3 years ago. So he's a guy that even if he washes out here, we might see back in the UFC in another year or two, or if they do another second chance version of Tough or whatever. But Peterson is a tough ask, and I agree with your assessment that there's a little bit of matchmaking wizardry here. The thing with Peterson is that I always have to remind myself that he's Texan, because you look at this guy, he's like 19-10. He has got a full chest panel tattoo of a flaming Superman logo on a chain. And I'm like, oh, you're from Nebraska, aren't you? He looks like the prototypical UFC Midwest journeyman from like 2008, like that type of guy. And he's not
buys his sunglasses at the gas station and like drinks a lot of Mountain Dew.
Hey, those sunglasses, they're $15, but they're 2 for $25. Like, planning. No, that's what Steven Peterson comes out off as, but no, he's from Plano, which is greater Dallas Fort Worth. He trains at Fortis. But then again, he fights like a Midwest journeyman from 2008. It's aggression. It's coming forward with a basic bread and butter set of kickboxing skills. He does throw in combination. That's nice. He will throw a 1-2, throw a leg kick. But yeah, he comes forward. He does put on pressure. He swings hard and always looking for the takedown. You look at his record. Yeah, he's got more submissions than knockouts, but you can tell he'd rather just knock everybody out. But he's kind of smart enough to know where his best routes to victory lie. So he's very good at shooting reactive takedowns when he's been hurt. He's good at taking advantage with takedowns when his opponent is a little bit rung up. And he goes to work pretty well on the ground. He's got solid ground and pound, pretty good top game, and more than willing to, to take the back and try to choke someone out, which he's not done. I mean, he's not had many chances at the UFC level. He's either been overmatched or he's been beating good grapplers. But, it's always there in his back pocket. And here against Alexander, I expect that they're both going to come out like houses on fire. Alexander might even hurt Peterson a few times. I think the length, the reach, I think Alexander's going to have a speed advantage. But Peterson's been impossible to stop and hard to even hurt, even when he's lost. So I think Alexander probably, we have a back and forth, real fun first round. Maybe Alexander even wins it, but at the end of the round, Alexander's the more tired looking guy on his stool, and Peterson starts to take over. He's just an incredibly tough guy. He's very dogged, and I think it would be the first. Yeah, looking at his record, it'd be the first. Give me Steven Peterson to get his first submission in the UFC. Alexander has proven very susceptible to that. Peterson, like I say, he looks kind of like a meathead, but he's a well-coached guy that is, in fact, pretty smart in the cage and pretty opportunistic about using his skill set to its best advantage. So give me Peterson to tap out a tired Alexander late in the second round.
Yeah, I like it. Peterson's game is just if you close your eyes and you think of a game of a veteran mid to lower level UFC featherweight, like that's his game. Like he's just well schooled. He can kind of do everything. He relies on his durability, and Alexander is not more venomous than Julian Erosa.
No.
And like he took everything Erosa had to give. And Erosa, he is live by the sword, die by the sword. But like when he's living by the sword, like he's fucking dangerous.
Yeah.
And for him to not just get his head cut off, by Erosa, I think that tells you enough.
Yeah. I mean, he went in against one of the more dangerous quick strike finishers in the UFC and didn't get finished. That's a good point. We head now to the featherweight division for a matchup between Daniel Pineda and Tucker Lutz. Pineda, the 37-year-old Houstonian, is 27-14 with 3 no contests in his well-traveled career. He is 4-5 with 1 no contest across 2 separate stints with the UFC. He had a run in the UFC in the 20 teens, went on the road fighting in multiple promotions, including Fury, including PFL, which ended strangely, to say the least. Since being back in the UFC in 2020, he is 1-1 with 1 no contest. He has not fought in almost 2 years. He last appeared at UFC Fight Night Gane versus Volkov, where he appeared to be getting the worst of a slugfest with Andre Fili before an accidental eye poke by Fili on Pineda ended the fight early in the second round. So back in the cage for the first time in about 21 months and looking to get back in the win column is Pineda, and standing in his way is Lutz. The 28-year-old Marylander is 12-12 overall. He is 1-1 since winning his way to the UFC on the 2020 edition of Dana White's Contender Series, where he won twice in the space of 6 weeks. He beat Chase Gibson by unanimous decision. That apparently was not good enough, so they brought him back 6 weeks later, where he took another unanimous decision over Sherrard Blackledge. That was good enough. He debuted in 2021, winning a unanimous decision over Kevin Aguilar at UFC 262. Then came back in November of 2021, dropping a unanimous decision to Pat Sabatini. The reason for Lutz's long layoff from the cage, he had a fight scheduled about a year ago with Sungwoo Choi. Choi was forced out of that fight, but your guess is as good as mine as to why it's still took another year to get Lutz another fight. If he had any health problems of his own, they did not make it as far as an actual booking with another fighter. So here he is, almost a year and a half from his last outing, and he is a prohibitive favorite to win here. Lutz, despite the long layoff, sitting out there at -260, Pineda plus 220. I am an open, shameless homer for, Texas fighters in general, sure, but especially Houston fighters. And Daniel Pineda is the OG. He is a fixture of local fighting. He's not as famous outside of Texas as someone like Derek Lewis, obviously. But like I said during the intro, he's kind of it for in town. And one of the toughest dudes I've ever met in my life. Like, if every fighter in Houston was at the Waffle House after some fight event, shit pops off, a chair goes flying across the room, I'm looking for Daniel Pineda so I can run and stand behind him and hide. Like that's how tough Daniel Pineda is. And for a long time, that kind of translated into the cage over the course of his career. 2 years ago, if this fight were taking place 2 years ago, this is exactly the kind of fight where I'd say, damn the odds. this is the kind of fight that Pineda will find a way to win. I said that about the Herbert Burns fight, and I was dead right. But at this point, at 37, with a lot of tread off the tires, I mean, he's well over 40 career fights at this point. And with, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, a couple of PED test failures. He had an incredible night of work in PFL in 2019 where he blew right through Movlid Haibulayev, a win that has really, really aged well. And Jeremy Kennedy, yeah.
Like a killer. Movlid is a killer.
Literally, that's his nickname. And they were both overturned when he tested positive for an entire Walgreens and like a feed and livestock store full of horse steroids. So all of that put together makes me think the things that made Pineda so dangerous, they have to be a little blunted at this point. His fight with Feely back in June of 2021, that goes down as a no contest, and it was a terrible eye poke. That eye poke was a fight-ending eye poke, but you know what? Feely was teeing off on him.
Oh my God. Feely looked great.
Yeah, Feely looked incredible. It like, as much as I love Pineda, I felt bad for Feely at the end of that fight because that had been a 10-8 first round if I ever saw one, and it looked to be business as usual until Feely made the mistake of coming out with his fingers extended and served the eye poke. And I'm not saying that Pineda was looking for an easy way out. I mean, when you have 14 career losses, you're not afraid of taking the L. You're willing to go out on your shield.
Sure.
It was just a bad night for everybody, but that was 2 years ago almost. And Pineda was looking a little washed even at the time, because at his best, he's a very, very good boxer, defensively sound, good power. He's a venomous grappler. He's fine at positional grappling, but also a guy that's just great at striking like lightning with a guillotine, a lightning quick back take, like throwing up a triangle quicker than his opponent knows what to do about it. Just, a deadly, well-rounded offensive fighter who was always just blood and guts, tough enough to hang around until his opponent either got tired or made a mistake. Like the Herbert Burns fight. Burns got tired, as Herbert Burns does. Burns won the first round, said, don't worry, Pineda got this, and Pineda smashed him in the second. I don't think the Daniel Pineda of 2020 is there anymore. So much as it pains me to pick against, a fighter that I was a fan of before I was in the media, Lutz, I don't think Lutz's upside is huge, but I think he's going to be enough to get past Pineda. Lutz on the way up, he's one of those guys that, I mean, most fighters who make it to the UFC level, if they had 10 or 12 or 15 fights in regional promotions, they usually finished all their first opponents really fast. Just, a more talented fighter usually runs through their opposition at the regional level. And then most of them come up against the wall at the UFC level, and we have to see if they can adapt their approach to the game, come up with a second set of ideas, a set of backup skills, good cardio. I mean, we're going to talk about Maycee Barber in a little bit. Maycee Barber thrashed everybody and called herself the future and said she was going to be the youngest UFC champ ever. And I mean, she hit a speed bump, and now she's kind of regrouped and she's back to winning fights again. That's Tucker Lutz. Tucker Lutz destroyed everybody early on, but even by the time he got to the Contender Series, there is a reason he had to fight twice on the Contender Series, and they were both decisions. And then he fought to another decision against Kevin Aguilar, who's just sort of a middling UFC featherweight. He's not a super athlete. Like, he's strong, he's coordinated, but he's not terribly fast. Luckily for him, he seems to be well conditioned, at least well conditioned to hold on and not be the visibly more tired fighter in a 3-round fight. But when he ran into Pat Sabatini, he got, to coin the term that Devin has used several times tonight, he got cooked by Pat Sabatini. And Pat Sabatini is another guy where he's not an off the charts athlete, but at least Sabatini has a couple of elite skills. Like, Sabatini's a very good grappler, and Sabatini put, in my book, at least one 10-8 round on Lutz.
He should have finished him probably, to be quite honest.
Shoulda, could have finished Lutz. And I know that was Sabatini in the middle of the run where like Renzo Gracie Philly fighters went 18 for 18 and wins. But unless Lutz has done some remarkable things in his time off, I think I've kind of seen his ceiling. I think especially in a division like 145, we might not see Lutz make it into the top 10. No. But I do think he's a guy that is going to stick around in the UFC for a while and probably win more than he loses for the next 5-6 years. And that guy, a middle roster UFC featherweight with decent cardio and who's relatively defensively sound, I think that's going to be too much for Daniel Pineda at this point. I don't know how much of Pineda is left. I don't know if we're going to get 70% of prime Daniel or 60 or 50, but whatever it is, it's going to come down to whether he can get some sort of low percentage Hail Mary thing, like just rock him with a haymaker, follow him down, sub him, let's make some mistake on the ground. Pineda has a triangle up before you know what's happening, but that's the outside chance. And that's why I understand why Lutz is almost a 3-1 favorite here, even though he lost real bad his last time out too. Give me Lutz here. I mean, Pineda is still hard to finish. Give me Lutz in a pretty lopsided decision where there's not much hope for that low percentage thing, and Lutz is kind of just starting to roll downhill on him worse and worse as the fight gets along. Maybe we even get a 10-8 round or something. So yeah, give me Lutz in a lopsided decision, and I'll be set on the recap.
Pineda isn't he's not a very big featherweight either.
Nope.
And I think, outside of like the PED stuff, it's like he did have 2 fights ruled as no contest due to him testing positive for PEDs, which like that helps, obviously. But at the same time too, like, we're talking about athleticism a lot this card because we're talking about lower weight class guys, and like shit like that really makes a difference here. And I think that's just like what Pineda lost, like just that little bit of like athletic edge where, he's getting tired a little bit more. He's getting tired a little bit quicker. I'm not able to hit him in this place when I used to be able to. When you strike with people, you don't always punch where they are. You punch where they're going to be. Well, now you're punching where they're going to be, but they're not there anymore. And shit like that makes a difference. I do think, all in all, like when this fight happens on Saturday, I do think Pineda is still the more venomous dude. I just think he's like more of an intentional finisher. Like he wants to punish guys. I don't think Tucker Lutz's game is a punishment based game. Like Pineda wants to fuck you up. Like that is his thing. Like he's going to go in there and that's what he wants to do, whether it be, some sort of submission or it's just some sort of vicious striking. And he is like he's like the big baby Miller of the PFL, isn't he? Maybe not as many. Like, can big baby Miller even fight anymore? Like, do athletic commissions allow him to box anymore? I literally think he got the X-nay. Like, they're like, nah, man.
Well, considering that there are so many different organizations, even if a commission would license him, who would bank one of their cards on that dude?
Oh, yeah, like he literally has to like fight in a cave somewhere.
It'd be like if you were looking at Josh Barnett, but Josh Barnett was also like overweight and like 300 pounds.
Yeah,
like there's so many ways that dude could fuck up your card. Like, why would you?
It's just, what a bizarre guy. But when you look at Tucker Lutz, like, first off, I remember vividly Dana telling him back in 2020 on the Contender Series, hey, you didn't win. You're not getting a record basically because you didn't finish your opponent. You're not getting a record. You're not getting a contract. You didn't finish your opponent. It's Contender Series, but we'll give you a chance. And he promised, I remember in the post fight, he's like, Dana, I promise you bring me back. I'm going to finish the guy. Gets brought back, doesn't finish him. Dana actually gives him a contract. But, he beat Sherrard Blackledge. Like, if you go to SureDog.com right now and go look at Sherrard Blackledge and tell me his last fight was that fight.
Yep.
And then if you look at Kevin Aguilar, like, I'm saying all these things because, like, I know you want Pineda to win.
I mean, on a personal level, I'd be happy if you won, sure.
And then you go look at Kevin Aguilar's record. Well, he lost to Dan Ige.
That was the last of 4 straight losses for him, yeah.
Yeah. And then the one before that was Charles Rosa. Like, I think Daniel Pineda tomorrow and on Saturday is probably better than Charles Rosa still. Like, they can both kind of do the same thing as far as grappling. I really like Pineda. Problem is like his last win was over Herbert Burns, and like the last time we saw Herbert Burns fight, he had to get carried out of the octagon by his big brother.
Yeah, like second round Herbert Burns should be more of a meme than it is. Like that dude has the worst gas tank like south of 170 I've ever seen.
He should fight Makwan Americani. Holy shit, that'd be hilarious. Like, both, but and they both gotta have the same game.
Mm-hmm.
You know, make the fight. But when I watch Tucker Lutz fight, like, I don't know what he's good at. Like, he just fights. Like, he kind of just like, nothing stands out. And that doesn't mean that he's not good at something, you know, like if you, like when you watch Islam Makhachev, you're like, okay, he can strike. He's pretty damn good at it actually, but like, he's still a better grappler. Like, we don't have that with Tucker. Like, we don't really know what he's good at. Pineda just has not looked good. And Feely looked like he was on fire that night, but then you look at the last couple fights from Feely after that, and like, he hasn't looked so good. So like, is that a tell of where Pineda was at in that moment? Or like, was Feely just cooking with gas that night? We don't know. This fight's actually hard to pick because I could see Pineda just hurting him in a moment because Tucker doesn't. The guys that have beat Pineda are guys that can do things at the UFC level. Like, we know Feely is good. We know he can kickbox. We know he comes from a good gym. Like, you almost have to side with Tucker, but like, could be a weird trap fight too, where Pineda just hurts him in 2 of 3 rounds. And the way that the MMA scoring criteria is today, you have to win. You know, he could get jabbed up for 3 minutes and 30 seconds and then club him and lay on top of him, and then there goes 1 round, and then maybe he hurts him again in the 3rd round, or he hurts him in the 1st and 3rd. I'm gonna go with Tucker Lutz here, but like, this is, first off, it's a shame that this is the fight that they booked Pineda in Texas. Yeah, because like, Pineda probably shouldn't be in the UFC at this point right now. So like, let him go out with a bang. Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, if you're at a fireworks show, like, do you light the mortar or do you light the sparkler? Like, they're lighting a sparkler here. Like, you know, we've talked about Juliana Rosa, but like, that's who he should be fighting. Someone that's just like equally dangerous and equally detonatable. Right. We're like,
somewhere it's going to end up on someone's highlight reel.
We're like, these, like, they're getting, like, one of these guys is getting 50K or both of them are getting 50K. Yeah. Like, that's the kind of fight that they should have booked them. So this is kind of criminal. And he's a 3-1 dog, or about 3-1 dog, right? Yep. So you got to go with Tucker Lutz here, but I'm going to root for Pineda.
Next up, and forgive me, but the UFC's own site, Sherdog, Google all differ as to whether this is the top prelim or the next fight is. So this might be your top prelim. It might be your main card opener. I'm not sure. It is the heaviest fight on this card, a middleweight matchup between Chidi Njokuani and Albert Duraev. Njokuani, the 34-year-old American of Nigerian descent fighting out of Las Vegas, is 22-8 with 1 no contest overall. He is 2-1 since joining the UFC out of Dana White's Contender Series back in September of 2021. He launched his UFC career with back-to-back first-round knockouts of Marc-Andre Barriault and Duško Todorovic before running into Gregory Rodriguez last September at UFC Fight Night Sandhagen versus Song, where a extremely bloody back-and-forth battle ended with Njokuani getting pounded out on the ground early in the second. He will look to get back on track against Duraev. And yes, I know it's Duraev, but I'm just Americanizing it because it's really hard to do that that syllable accent.
Especially when your first name's Albert.
Yeah. Anyway, 34-year-old Russian, 15-4 overall, 1-1 since joining the UFC. Out of that very same season of Dana White's Contender Series back in 2021, he was on the week after Njokuani. He's also a former ACB middleweight champ. That, of course, the predecessor to ACA, now Chechnya's top promotion, for what it's worth. He won his UFC debut. It was a unanimous decision over Roman Kopylov at UFC 267 in October of 2021. He came back last June and had a back and forth fight with Joaquin Buckley before a pretty nasty cut ended up in a stoppage between the second and third rounds. So he's looking to get back in the win column as well. He is not favored to do so. Njokuani, and minus 170 favorite, Duraev plus 140 on the comeback. I got to say, it was strange to me to see that these guys are basically the same age. They're within a few weeks of each other's age because Duraev has a bit of young prospect feel to me, even though he's a former ACA champ, whereas Chidi Njokuani feels to me like he's been around forever. And of all the people that are in the UFC, like have joined within the last 2 years and are experiencing any kind of success, he might be the most unlikely. He's up there above like Chris Curtis and Andre Fialho. Because I remember Chidi Njokuani fighting in RFA before it was LFA and just being pretty good. And I remember him struggling in Bellator, like teeing off on people like Melvin Gillard, but just getting worked by John Salter. And I was like, he'll be a fun guy. He'll get some nice knockouts, but that dude's never coming within sniffing distance of the UFC. And if he does, he's not going to do very well. And not only is he here, but he's got a couple bonuses in his back pocket. And he was having a pretty good fight against a borderline top 10 guy his last time out. Chidi Njokuani, like the magic for him, I think, was moving up to 185 because for a lot of his career, he was frustrating because he had all the tools. We're talking about a guy that has dozens of kickboxing and Muay Thai fights, right? You know, you talk to someone like Sherdog editor emeritus Mike Sloan, who lives in Vegas, and he's like, I think I've seen Chidi Njokuani in 50 Muay Thai fights without ever going to see him on purpose. He's just a weekly fixture here. You know, back even when he was on contract with Bellator, he was still fighting like, you know, constantly in striking events. So a very good kickboxer who had all the offensive tools, obviously rare physical qualities. He was titanic for 170. I mean, he's big for 185, but he was frustrating because his chin was a little bit susceptible, probably because he had a terrible weight cut. He didn't have a gas tank problem in that he just gassed out and fell over and died. He had a gas tank problem in that he threw frustratingly little volume because he fought like a guy who was guarding his gas tank all the time. It was just maddening to watch. It's nothing worse than watching a dude that you know could knock the other guy out, but he's not going to because he's going to throw 6 strikes this round. That was him all the way up. Then he moved up to 185, and all of a sudden, he was a better fighter in every way except for one. He still is not great on the ground. And that's where he ran into his problems in Bellator. Like he moved up to 185. He looked better, but when he ran into John Salter, who is a very, very good grappler, when he ran into Rafael Carvalho, who is, you know, good wrestler, good top position grappler, he seemed to hit his ceiling. In the UFC, it's been the same. He lanced Marc-Andre Barriault. He lanced Dusko Todorovic, and his fight against Gregory Rodriguez, that could have been stopped on Rodriguez's cut any second. Like, if you don't remember that fight last September.
Oh my God.
Rodriguez had something. I mean, it looked as much like a wound made by an axe or machete as any cut in UFC history. Like, it's up there with the Marvin Eastman, you know, like goat vagina forehead thing. It's up there with the worst cuts that you've ever seen.
It looked like an assault with a hatchet. It looked like someone walked up to him and thumped him in the head with a hatchet. And like it was bad. It
was incredibly bad. And I don't speak great Portuguese. I mean, I'm better than you think as I speak Spanish and I speak French. But apparently Rodriguez's corner said, yo, man, this cut is bad. You need to take this guy down and finish this thing fast. Because that is exactly what he did. Came out, went back and forth a few combinations. Then he took Njokuani down with ease, slid right into side control and pounded the shit out of him. Boom. Rodriguez.
That's his game, though. Like, that's what he needs. And, like, Rodriguez can bang, but, like, he is actually, like, a world-class grappler and a world-class wrestler with, like, supreme athleticism and just a lot of abilities there. But for him to have that back and forth fight with Chidi, like, that's how RoboCop fights go.
Yep.
And Chidi had a lot of success there, man.
I think he would have won that fight. It would have been stopped on the cut after the second round, except that Rodriguez had that safety valve. He knew he needed to finish the fight, probably. He knew his best route was to do it on the ground, and he was able to take down Njokuani pretty easily. And from there, it was over in seconds. He moved to side control. He pounded him out. That's the problem with Njokuani. All the things that moving up in weight fixed, it did not fix his defensive wrestling. It didn't fix his escapability on the ground. And so 185 isn't loaded with wrestlers like 170 is, like 155 is, but it's got some, and they're all going to have that same safety outlet against Njokuani. And Duraev is no exception. Duraev, in fact, he's cut from the same general mold as Rodriguez. He is a guy who's an outstanding wrestler and top position grappler who also likes to get wild and test his luck on the feet. And like Rodriguez, it's partly probably because he's a wild dude and partly because he knows he has the ground game in his back pocket. So the question to me is, yeah, Njokuani is coming into this favored, but what's he going to need to do? He's going to need to hurt Duraev badly enough that he either finishes him or Duraev is too out of it to just get an easy takedown. And interestingly, Duraev's fight against Buckley played out almost along the same lines. Buckley carved him up, and the thing ended up getting stopped by the doctor in between the second and third round.
His eye got really big and swollen.
Yeah,
I think that's what it was, right? Like, Buckley just fucking swole his eye shut, right? I think so. It looked like he had like a softball implanted in his eye.
Yeah, he had like a huge hematoma on his eye. And I'm trying to remember. Okay, no, it was Duraev cut Buckley. Like, Buckley had a cut, but no, like, yeah, it was just a huge, like, swollen hematoma. And
that's what it was, right?
Yeah. And probably, I didn't remember the medical report, but probably a broken orbital. He couldn't see. I'm pretty sure he blew his nose and like inflated the thing and made it worse. But
it was big.
Yeah. And Njokuani's either going to need to do that or just knock him cold, which obviously he's proven himself capable of doing. And so my questions going into this are, is Duraev going to come out and try to strike with Njokuani for any length of time, or is he going to immediately try to bring this thing to the ground? And if he does decide to strike with Njokuani, will he be made to pay for it? Because while getting Chidi Njokuani down is still easier than it should be, too easy for comfort, if you can get in on his hips, if you can get your hands on him, he is good at keeping people at range. He has good footwork. He doesn't back straight up. He uses lateral movement. He uses his height really well. Like, he's got a nice teep. He's got a nice long jab. So getting him down, if you can get your hands on him, is kind of easy, but getting your hands on him is still challenging. This has Duraev upset written all over it, but I am going to go chalk here. Give me Njokuani to keep Duraev on the ends of his punches, probably use that push kick up the middle a lot. Kind of like we saw Leon Edwards do to Kamaru Usman just this past weekend. Just, it hurts. It stops your forward motion. It kind of interrupts whatever you were going to do next in terms of striking or a level change or whatever it is. And probably just kind of beat him increasingly badly across 3 rounds. If Njokuani strikes out of nowhere with a huge head kick, I won't be that shocked, but just I expect him to jab, move, start chopping at that front leg with low kicks. He has a brutal low kicks just to reduce Duraev's mobility, his explosion, if he decides to take a shot. And give me Njokuani to win a pretty one-sided decision here.
Yeah, I think Duraev, like on the Contender Series against Bittenhouse, when I watched him, I was like, this guy, like out of Chechnya, I'm like, this guy's a monster. Like his wrist control game is really good. His top game is really good. His ground and pound is good. But when you dive into him a little bit more, like he's a minus athlete and he's not very big for the division. Like he's tall and everything, but like he's not like, doesn't seem very strong for a guy with that type of game. Like Joaquin Buckley is going to be going down to welterweight, and Buckley's a really small, maybe the smallest, like middleweight. Like who is smaller than Joaquin Buckley at middleweight?
Yeah, Buckley's 5'8". Yeah,
but like you couldn't take down Buckley. Mind you, Buckley does have a little bit of a wrestling game. He does have good takedown defense, but like if Buckley is piecing you up like that, Buckley's a great striker. He has probably the best knockout in the UFC history, in the history of the UFC. But like Chidi's different. Like that's a whole different level of striking and power. I think he's gonna throw a lot of stuff up the middle, like you say, teeps, but I think a lot of knees, uppercuts, stuff like that. If we'll find out right away if he defends the first Duraev takedown, you could see Duraev look really uncomfortable in the Buckley fight too. And you've seen it in his past fights too, where even though he was on a supreme winning streak, like he had not lost a fight since 2014 up until that point. But like M1 Global, like those are good promotions, but could Chidi have gone out there and just knocked all those people out too? Probably. Like would Chidi get pushed around on the feet by Joaquin Buckley? Absolutely not.
No.
Like he would kick Buckley's head off. He's huge. Like Chidi's faster than Buckley. He's bigger. Like I don't really love the line because I think this is like a pick'em fight just due to Chidi's, Njokuani has shown some grappling deficiencies. But like, I just don't think Duraev is the same athletic level of Rodriguez. He's not as tough as Rodriguez, as Robocop. Like that, like Robocop's built different. Win, lose, or draw. Like he's just tough as fuck. And he's not the athlete that Robocop is. And he's not nearly as big. Gonna go Chidi here. Think he's gonna knock him out in the second round. And I think it's gonna be something up the middle. Maybe like a jump knee or something where Duraev is gonna get desperate after getting hurt.
All right. 2 calls for Chidi and Njokuani to get it done. Up next at UFC on ESPN 43, the other fight that is either the top prelim or the main card opener, not quite sure, but it is Alex Perez versus Manel Kape at 125 pounds. Perez, the 30-year-old Californian, is 24-7 overall. He is 6-3 since joining the UFC out of the first season of Dana White's Contender Series. He is on a 2-fight losing streak. Having said that, they don't get much more forgivable than losses to Davison Figueiredo and Alexandre Pantoja. However, both those fights were first-round submission losses. He got tapped out in the headliner of UFC 255 back in November of 2020 by Figueiredo, got guillotined, then came back last July after a lengthy layoff at UFC 277, where Pantoja took his back, put him in a neck crank once again in under 2 minutes. So prior to that, he had been on a 3-fight win streak. He's looking to get back in the win column or presumably at least last more than half a round. And standing in his way is a guy that is pretty good at putting people away in the first round. It is Kape, the 29-year-old Angolan by way of Thailand. He is 18-6 overall. He is 3-2 since joining the UFC as the former Rizin bantamweight champ. He left Rizin at the end of 2019, as the sitting bantamweight champ. He won the vacant belt from Kai Asakura. Then, thanks to COVID, ended up taking all of 2020 off. He came to the UFC in 2021 as one of the more highly touted free agent signings in recent memory, and promptly lost his first 2 fights in the octagon. Those being decision losses to Alexandre Pantoja and Matheus Nicolau. Say what you will, both of those have aged pretty well, as those guys have established themselves as top 10, if not top 5 contenders. But since then, it's been all wins. He came back in August of 2021 at UFC 265, knocked out Ode Osborne with a brutal flying knee. A win marred only by the fact that Kape missed weight. But since then, he has first round knockout of Giles Zhumagulov and a unanimous decision over David Dvorak, neither of which involved him missing weight. So the Dvorak fight that was last December at UFC Fight Night, Cannonier versus Strickland, that made his 3rd straight UFC win. He'll look to make it 4 straight and possibly insert himself into the sooner rather than later title picture at flyweight. He is a moderate favorite to do so. Kape is minus 175. Perez plus 150. Dev, how present on your radar was Kape in 2019 when he signed with the UFC? Like, were you a close follower of Ryzen? Did you have to kind of get acquainted with him once it was announced?
Well, I mean, like, Kai Sakura is good.
Yeah.
Like, that's a good win. But, I mean, Brandon Moreno's the champ, and Brandon Moreno's really good, but like Pantoja might be the best flyweight on the planet still.
Yeah.
And I think it was criminal that they booked him against Pantoja. They wanted him to be fighting for a title like off rip. That's what that Pantoja fight meant.
Absolutely. And I don't think they realized how good Pantoja was at the time either.
No. And like still to this day, like, I mean, I don't... Who scrambles like Pantoja? Who hits as hard as he does? Like, he is like Pantoja's like very, very, very good, and criminally have been, hidden away from a title shot. Like, he needs to be fighting for a title next, and that's probably what's going to happen. But, and Nicolau's also, I mean, Nicolau might be the sharpest flyweight. When I mean sharpest, I mean just far as like counterpunching, technicality, not a lot of mistakes made. Like, Nicolau is a very cut and dry, like just a sharp fighter. He is just very, very, he's got a very straightforward, low mistake game. And he like had a close fight with Nicolau. Ode Osborne, we talked about this. He's pretty good. Outside of Zaga Zumagulov's record, like prior to the UFC, he was also a regional level champion, and Zalgas is good. He's actually coming back. I'm glad he's coming back. Because he's been shafted. Like, this is a guy that, I mean, we talk about Petrian and the judges not liking him. I mean,
Zalgas, like, he kind of condensed all of Jorge Masvidal's terrible split decision losses into like 1 year. Like, like, I'm with you. Zhumagulov is so much better than his record.
And I understand why Zhumagulov was like, okay, fuck it, I'm done. Because I can't, I mean, I'd take my toys and go home too. At that point, if I was him, I'd be pissed. Yeah. But like, that's a good win. I didn't love the David Dvorak fight. I thought he showboated too much. I think he could have knocked him out. Manel Kape should have finished him. There's multiple times in that fight where he had him on Queer Street, on skates, had him hurt. I do think Alex Perez is a guy, like, again, like, how do you, like, just like you said, he lost via submission to Figgy, and he actually was looking pretty good wrestling-wise in that fight against Figgy, even though it was a very short fight. And that's just a Figueiredo type of win. Pantoja's really good. Like, those are just guys that are super athletes where, like, that's how they win fights. Before that, like, Jussier Formiga was, and I don't know why the UFC got rid of him. Like, Formiga was good. That's a good win. Alex Perez. Perez's game is definitely a more of a wrestling, grappling based game. Kape is an athlete. Like when he has his shit in check, like, you know, he's a problem. I think he's probably going to hurt Perez here. Perez is probably going to have some grappling success. I think Manuel Kape eventually defends one takedown and hurts him on a break, like some sort of clinch break after defending a takedown. Just hits him with something vicious, or eventually defends, gets taken down, gets up, defends a takedown, and then the third takedown comes, and then he hits him with like a jump knee or like an uppercut, or just some sort of punishing blow, you know, after the third or fourth takedown attempt. I think that's what we're going to get here. And Perez has a knack for getting caught in the first round with shit.
Yes. So you're thinking first round TKO?
Yep. And I think it may be another Ode Osborne type knee. And it's weird. I'm picking 2 fights in a row for, you know, I don't ever pick against grapplers. Like but these 2 last fights are, you know, guys that they're grapplers, but I don't know if their grappling is good enough to keep them away with getting caught with something.
Yeah. That makes it unanimous here. Kape can be a frustrating fighter sometimes. Obviously, he's had lapses in focus, at least in fights he was winning, like the Dvorak fight, or yeah, he could have made it more emphatic. He's missed weight. But his potential is so tantalizing, and he is still just 29 years old. He is as athletic a fighter as there is in that division, and we're talking about probably the most athletic division in the sport, like 125. Even by flyweight standards, he's explosive, and he brings a level of power that few other flyweights do. Perez, I mean, he's a good athlete, but kind of like, you know, we talked about with some of the earlier flyweight fights in this card, there's fast and then there's flyweight fast. Like Perez is like regular fast. His problem, honestly, against the people that have beaten him in the UFC is it's been faster fighters who've caught him cold. Figueiredo, you know, just caught him and hurt him. Benavidez caught him and hurt him. Pantoja, I mean, Perez is a better straight out wrestler than Pantoja, and he's a very capable grappler, but Pantoja just took his back standing and just was much faster than Perez. He was on him before Perez could really react. Perez is one of the bigger flyweights in the division. He's very physically strong. You saw him face to face with Figueiredo. He was a bigger, bulkier guy than Davis and Figueiredo. But yeah, he's going to be the slower guy on the feet than Kape by a wide margin. And one of the most frustrating things about Kape's game is when he won't throw enough volume and he's just waiting for the perfect highlight reel shot, which if it never comes, he just ends up losing a decision. But here, I think it's going to come. And for the same reasons you've kind of laid out there, the things that Perez needs to do to win are going to put him right on Kape's gunnery range. Yeah. I don't think it's out of question at all to call for a flying knee or an intercepting knee knockout here, because Perez is going to have to shoot. And he's probably going to have to shoot from further out than he's comfortable doing. He can try to like barrel into the clinch with Kape. He'll probably be stronger there. But Kape has shown pretty sturdy takedown defense because everybody wants to take Kape down and most people can't. The upside of Kape's relatively low output sometimes is that if he's forced past the first round, I mean, he does have the cardio to do it. So Perez is going to be in danger the entire time while he's looking to, you know, get takedowns and grind and make Kape tired. And it's a shame. I like Perez a lot. I like wrestlers. I think Perez in particular is just kind of a fun, scrappy dude. But this is about as high ranked a guy as you could put against Kape that I would be this comfortable picking Kape against. I think this style matchup really favors him. And I'm with you. I think you called first round. I'll say second just to be different, but this one is built for a Manel Kape highlight reel moment, and look for him to hopefully make weight this time, collect a bonus check, cut some sort of insane promo that moves him a little closer to a title shot. But yeah, big night from Manel Kape in my book too. Next up on the UFC on ESPN 43 main card is a women's flyweight matchup between Andrea Lee and Maycee Barber. Lee, the 34-year-old Texan-born Louisiana native, is 13-6 overall. She is 5-4 in the UFC. She lost her last time out. It was a unanimous decision loss to Viviane Araújo at UFC on ESPN Blachowicz versus Rakic last May. Prior to that, she had won back-to-back fights over Antonina Shevchenko and Cynthia Calvillo, both by second-round stoppage. One TKO, one submission by triangle armbar, I think. Prior to that, she had lost 3 straight against Joanne Wood, Lauren Murphy, and Roxanne Modafferi. So she will look to get yet one more fight above 500 in the UFC, certify herself a continued factor in that division. Standing in her way will be Barber. 24-year-old Colorado native is 11-2 overall. She is 6-2 since joining the UFC out of the second season of Dana White's Contender Series, and prior to that, LFA. She debuted in the UFC with 3 straight. She debuted in the UFC on 3 straight TKO wins. Then, as an undefeated prospect, calling herself the future, ran into her first speed bumps. In January of 2020, she dropped a unanimous decision to Roxanne Modafferi in a fight in which she appeared to injure her knee early on. Came back in February of 2021, lost another unanimous decision, this time to your now flyweight champ, Alexa Grasso. But since then, Barber is back with 3 straight wins over Miranda Maverick, Montana De La Rosa, and Jessica Ai, all by decision. The most recent of those, the Ai fight, was at UFC 276 last July. So Barber, looking for her 4th straight win in this division, looking to certify herself a title contender and prove that the future was not canceled, just a little bit delayed, and she is a strong favorite to do so. Barber, minus 240, Lee plus 200. I can't remember who I said this about a couple weeks ago on the show with Keith, but I'll say it about Barber. I am not sure when I wrote Barber off as a busted prospect, but it proved to be premature because I look now and she's 6-2 in the UFC. Her 2 losses, no loss is great, but both losses are pretty understandable. She tore her knee early in the Modafferi fight, and Modafferi is just usually a tough out. Maybe a more experienced Barber, maybe a Barber with a more diverse offensive skill set would have found a way to win that fight anyway. But hey, she took her first loss. Fair play. I think 6 months later, she would have beaten Modafferi badly. Then against Grasso, hey, Grasso moving up to 125 was the truth. She's now your champ. The wins losses don't age much better than, yeah, I lost to your now champ in her first or second fight in the division.
And a close one.
And it was a close one. And since then, she's 3-0. She beat Miranda Maverick, who is another one of the more promising prospects in the division, and 2 solid mid-roster flyweights in Montana De La Rosa and Jessica Ai. And she's not getting the Hulk smash TKOs anymore. But she's winning fights against people she can't just smash through. It's almost exactly what I would have said she had to learn after the Grasso fight. But she's going to need to figure out something to do with people that she can't just run across the cage, throw them down on the ground, and smash them. She apparently has figured that out. And it was hard not to see her as a little bit of a laughingstock. She came to the UFC with such hubris. 22-year-old saying, I'm the future. I'm going to be the youngest UFC champ ever. In fans' eyes, there had to be almost all of them had this thought, oh man, won't it be funny when she slips on her first banana peel? And the kind of like weird sports dad vibe and stuff, like all the outside intangible reasons to kind of laugh when she lost a couple fights were there, but she herself, she's done the right things. Despite the knee injury that cost her the fight against Modafferi, she's still a plus athlete. by flyweight standards. She's fast. She's very strong. I've always thought her striking game was pretty rudimentary. Like her best work comes as, I think, a ground and pounder. Like she doesn't have any submissions at the UFC level, but several of her like some of her best offense has always been on opponents that she's thrown down. She's also brutal against the cage. She has great finishing instincts against fighters who are hurt. I can't remember whether it was the JJ Aldrich fight or the Jillian Robertson fight where she hurt her and her opponent kind of went careening back into the cage.
Just teed off.
And she ran up and stopped short, like stopped in comfortable boxing range, and then just wiped her out. And afterwards she said, I always hate when one fighter hurts the other and then just runs over and lets them clinch and recover. So I just stopped, and didn't like touch her and went back to striking. Like, there are fighters with 20 fights in the UFC that still don't know how to do that.
Like, no, that's a round of applause.
Yeah.
She didn't win against Miranda Maverick.
Yeah.
I know that's what her record says, but like, we all know what happened. And I don't know if Miranda Maverick is as good as we all thought she was either. But, also, like, I also might have said that before Erin Blanchfield showed us everything that she has. So maybe I should take that back. But Maycee Barber's game is being a bully.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're a bully in women's MMA in general, and you have the physicality to be a bully, like that can take you far. Regardless of what her record and what her past is, like her current MMA game, like we just watched Casey O'Neill just walk forward and get her head, kind of boxed off by Jennifer Maia. But in those moments, like Maycee Barber, her clinch game against the cage, I know it's fresh in my mind from last week, but it's a very like Usman, like, just push you against the cage, punish you. But Maycee Barber has really good elbows in the clinch. Like she's got a lot of good elbows. She keeps her head very straight up and down, but again, it's, I don't know who's going to make her pay for it. I don't think it's going to be Andrea Lee. Andrea Lee's, first off, like, is Tony Kelly allowed in Texas, and is he going to be in her corner?
I imagine he'll be there. As far as I'm aware, they're still a thing.
Will Adrian Yanez be there?
Adrian Yanez will almost certainly be there.
Is Tony Kelly allowed in Texas after that fight?
Yeah, it's a pretty porous border, you know? Like some Texans want to build a wall, between us and Mexico. I'd rather build a wall between us and Louisiana.
But the food's good there still.
Food's good in Mexico. Like we're not short. We're not short on good food here, man. Like, look at me.
Yeah. Andrea Lee's game is, her KGB, like it even fits her choice of significant others in life. But anyway, her game is she's volume oriented. She's tough. Like she's definitely tough. She can kickbox. She likes to get in the pocket. She will get bloody. She's not scared to get into the pocket. I just think the Maycee Barber physicality and confidence is back now. I don't even think she needs to get takedowns. I think Andrea Lee's going to be willing to stand at range with her. I think Maycee Barber just probably hits harder. Andrea Lee is definitely an OG. Like she's been fighting for a hot minute. She's fought a lot of people. She's fought the who's who. She has some wins. She has some losses. She's coming off a loss to Viviane Araujo. Araujo's pretty good. Like, even though she just lost to Hebos, she also had a close fight with the current champ. And the fight that she had with her was pretty close. I just think Barber's younger. She's bigger. She's not cutting down to 105 anymore. The knee injury, and it's kind of crazy because a knee injury should be like a huge red flag for any young prospect in MMA. Like, knee injuries are huge. Like, people get knee injuries and never come back. Yep. In 2022, 2023, you have a lot better chance to get great rehabilitation. But still, like, to have a close fight with Miranda Maverick is good. but now she's coming off of really good wins. No, she's not finishing people, and I don't think she'll finish Andrea Lee here, but I think they'll have close kickboxing exchanges. But I just think Maycee Barber is just nastier than her. I think she's more vicious. I think she's more of a bully. I think she's going to be more physical than Andrea Lee. I think she's going to push her up against a cage and, do what she does in the clinch. I could see a lot of elbows. And Andrea Lee doesn't have good defense. She gets hit a lot.
Yep. No, you're thinking Barber by decision?
Yeah, by decision. And, there may be one close round where there's like a swing round involved, but then I could just see like a Maycee Barber just, hurting her with something, overwhelming her, maybe not finishing her, but, having some vicious exchanges against a cage where Andrea Lee's like, this sucks.
I'm with you here. The thing about Andrea Lee is like when you look at her and you look at her facing off with her opponent, she looks like she should always be the stronger woman. She looks like she should always be the better athlete. And she isn't necessarily either. Like she does throw good volume, but she doesn't throw with a ton of power, even by women's flyweight standards. Sure. Where I've said before, the one-sided women's flyweight UFC bout where one woman is outstriking the other, but there's not going to be a finish is like my own personal hell. And Andrea Lee's been in a lot of those. And she's pretty capable on the ground if she can get it there, but she's not a good wrestler. So it tends to take her opponent making a mistake. It's been a while since she had a win over a good UFC flyweight. She looks like she should be able to be the bully, and she rarely is. And here, I do think this is a tailor-made matchup for Barber to look good, because Barber makes a mistake, Lee's not the one who's probably going to finish her. If Barber overthrows or overexerts trying to get takedowns and gets tired late, like I don't think Lee's the one to make her pay for that either. And the situations that Lee favors, I mean, she would prefer to have a distance kickboxing match in all of her fights, but Barber's not going to allow that. No, Barber's going to crash the pocket and make her uncomfortable. And Lee doesn't have the footwork or the muscle to stop her. Like she cannot, as Laura Sanko so beautifully put it, advertise the price of admission, because the price of admission to getting in the phone booth with Andrea Lee is short, is low.
Yeah,
you only
like have to Barber, be this tall. Right, that right.
Yeah, Barber can shove, punch her way into range, shove her to the fence and clinch if that's what she wants. And from the clinch, I agree. I mean, she's not full on Kamaru Usman, where she just spent years suffocating the best fighters on the planet, but it's miserable. She's capable of doing damage there with elbows, knees, stomps, and she's pretty adept at getting takedowns from there if she wants. If she takes Lee down, Barber is nasty from top position. And while Lee is surprisingly good on the ground, she's not especially good from her back on the ground. So yeah, I think Barber's probably going to beat Lee up pretty good in this one. Nobody in the UFC has finished Andrea Lee, and that includes people like Lauren Murphy and Viviane Araújo that I think are probably better overall fighters than Barber right now. So I'm not going to pick it now. Also should mention that Lee's loss to Murphy was a little bit of an iffy decision. Murphy probably shouldn't have won that fight. I was there. Yuck. Anyway.
Barber's more of a bully than them, though. Barber is much more of a fighter that's just like Lauren Murphy and Araújo. Like, they respect their opponents a lot more than Barber does.
Barber forces the issue.
Yeah, like
it's a good way. Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised at this stage of the game where Andrea Lee's at. I'm not calling for a finish, but like if you just see her getting torn up from elbows, like against the cage, or getting taken down with ground and pound, and I could see it happening. And Andrea Lee doesn't do anything to make you pay for getting into the pocket. Like, she doesn't have a back foot counter game. No. You know, she doesn't have the ability to take a backward L step and throw a straight shot while you're just marching forward with your chin up. Like, that's what Maycee Barber does, but there's not many women's flyweights that can do that.
No.
Grasso, maybe, you know.
No, and that's what I'm saying about Lee. She looks like she should be exactly the type of person to kill you for doing. I mean, you squint, she looks like Valentina Shevchenko. They're about the same size, same build, same hair.
Even longer.
And Lee is just not, she's not the athlete. She doesn't have the power. She definitely doesn't have the skills to stop what Barber wants to do there. So I'm with you on that. Like, I think it probably will end up being a bit of a lopsided thing. And if there's any hint of a glove grab, fence grab, eye poke, look out for some accusations of like dirty Coloradans, you know, like maybe we'll start a whole civil war over that shit. But give me Barber in a decision where she's definitely rolling downhill by the end.
Yeah.
Next up at UFC on ESPN 43 is a featherweight matchup between Nate Landwehr and Austin Lingo, who steps in on relatively short notice. This had been scheduled to be Landwehr versus Alex Caceres. Caceres was forced out of the fight, and Landwehr, who had been scheduled to fight 2 weeks ago against Ricardo Ramos at UFC Las Vegas, was in need of a fight since Ramos blew weight so badly that the fight was canceled. So they, I guess, told Lingo to stay on deck, and he now does get that fight, that paycheck, maybe even that win bonus. Landwehr, 34-year-old Tennessee native, is 16-4 overall. He is 3-2 since joining the UFC as a former M1 Global featherweight champ. He's on a 2-fight win streak, those being a third round submission of Ludovic Klein back in October of 2021 at UFC Fight Night Ladd versus Dumont, and then a majority decision win over David Onama at UFC on ESPN Vera versus Cruz last August. He will look to make it 3 in a row. Lingo will try to make it 3 in a row for himself. He is 28-year-old from Mesquite, Texas. He's 9-1 overall. He's 2-1 since joining the UFC as a probable. I mean, he was probably in line for an LFA title shot when he got the call, but he stepped up on short notice. One of the first short notice step up fighters of the COVID era. It was February of 2020, or actually that was right before COVID. Yeah. Anyway, he gets called up to the UFC February of 2020 at UFC 247, drops a unanimous decision to Youssef Zalal. He followed that up with 2 wins in 2021, unanimous decision over Jacob Kilburn in January, and another one over Luis Saldana in August. He has been off ever since then, so right around a year and a half since we've seen Lingo in the cage. And here he comes, and he is a pretty heavy underdog. Landwehr is minus 275, Lingo plus 230. The reason for the long layoff for Lingo, he was injured for much of the year. He was forced out of one fight earlier in the year, and then he was actually the one who was supposed to take on David Onama. He was forced out with an injury, and it was Landwehr who stepped in there. So this fight actually ends up kind of, tying up or completing a little circle there. But yeah, still just 28 years old, but has had quite a long layoff due to a variety of injuries. You said this about a couple fighters on this card, and I'm definitely going to say it about Austin Lingo. When I watched Lingo in LFA beating people like Solo Hatley, I thought Austin Lingo is a good fighter, but I'm not sure what kind of fighter he is yet. I'm not sure exactly what he's good at, because when you're a 6-fight veteran fighting in LFA, if you have 1 or 2 good skills, decent athleticism, and the aggression to apply those skills, you're going to walk through most people. That's regional MMA for you. And at the UFC level, he's fought so sporadically that it's now 4 or 5 years on from those LFA fights, and I'm still not exactly sure what Austin Lingo is good at. I do know he is a big featherweight in terms of just being tall and having a long frame, who uses it pretty well. But his wins over Kilburn and Saldana, those weren't super high level guys. He got out wrestled of all things by Youssef Zalal pretty badly. And Zalal's a guy who wants to kickbox, but quickly saw where he had the advantage and grounded Lingo badly. Then just, won a pretty easy decision that way.
And went to bantamweight.
And Zalal was a bantamweight in waiting the whole time. That's the other thing. Like, took down Lingo. Like, I'm sorry, but if you're an American and you get taken down at will by like a little Moroccan kickboxer, like, that's not a good look.
No.
And
no.
if Lingo has not shored up those problems, he's going to be in trouble against Nate Landwehr, because Landwehr,
he can do everything.
He can do everything. He's a guy where
thing.
His record is deceptive. You look at his record, he's got a ton of knockouts, not a whole lot of submissions, but he's very comfortable on the ground. That's where several of his, like the things that show up on his record as KO and TKO actually took place on the ground. He is a well-rounded guy who he's more athletic than he looks. Like, featherweight is one of the divisions where you get guys that pass the eyeball test in terms of athleticism. Like, you look at Alexander Volkanovski, you can tell that dude probably, even if you don't like or know Australian rules football, he was probably pretty damn good at it. He just looks like a plus athlete. Yeah. He looks like a spark plug. And 145 is full of those guys. Nate Landwehr ain't one of them. Like, Landwehr, he's like a 34-year-old who's built like a very, very fit 50-year-old. But he actually is pretty quick. He's very strong. And he's got to talk about another featherweight who doesn't present as a great athlete, but is better than he seems. Darren Elkins. Like, a lot of Landwehr's thing is people will get ahead on him, but he'll survive. And with Elkins, it's like, oh, well, then once you're tired, I'm going to take you down and punch you out. Landwehr can do that. Landwehr can also be like, oh, you're getting tired and your hands are starting to drop. I'm just going to start teeing off on you.
The Onama fight, not a lot of power, but still had good volume going late into the round. That's what won him that fight.
Yeah, that's a brilliant, that's a brilliant example of it. So, he is like just maybe a little more striking oriented Darren Elkins. And of course, the other difference being that he's been doing that in the UFC for like 2 years, and Elkins has been doing it for I feel like
22.
He's got like 20. Yeah, I feel like he's got like 20 or 25 fights at this point. But Landwehr, the people who've beat him at the UFC level put him away fast. Like, Herbert Burns iced him. And knowing what we know now about Herbert Burns, if that fight gets to the end of the first round, Landwehr destroys Burns in the second.
Even 45 more seconds potentially.
Yeah,
all
Burns
bullshit aside.
Yeah, Burns probably needed to be carried from the arena after that one too. And then, of course, Julian Erosa just erased him with a flying knee.
But that's what he does.
Yeah, that's not what Austin Lingo does. Lingo has plenty of finishes, but they are finishes by accumulation or they're opportunistic submissions. Those are not feasible routes to victory against Nate Landwehr, at least based on what we've seen. Here, give me Landwehr to beat up on Lingo. And again, just if Lingo doesn't finish him in the first round, or at least do so much damage that Landwehr is compromised for the rest of the fight, or has a 10-8 hole to dig out of, I think this is pretty cut and dry. Landwehr pulls further and further ahead as they go along, because that's what he does. He's a survivor. He's a builder. And against Lingo, he might not even have that much to build or survive from. Like, Lingo seemed like a marginal UFC talent before he missed most of 2 years with a variety of injuries. Who knows what he's going to look like when he comes back, whereas Landwehr is a little more of a known quantity. Give me Landwehr here by I'm going to say he gets a late stoppage. Landwehr by third round TKO, probably on the ground.
Yeah, and one thing about these two guys is, Lingo's an MMA fighter, so is Landwehr, but Landwehr likes to fight. Like, when you watch Nate Landwehr fight, especially when you give him a microphone after he wins, you could tell he loved every fucking second of it. Like, he's a fighter's fighter. I mean, to go and be an American from Tennessee and go crush dudes over in Russia on that Russian circuit, number one, that just takes fucking balls. And number two, as we know, Russians are good at MMA. That's no, that is no, it's not a newsflash. We Nate Landwehr is not bad. And he can kind of do everything. If he could stay tough with a guy like Onama, who is bigger than him, probably a better athlete, more explosive, I just don't see what Austin Lingo could do to him that Onama can't, and he still beat Onama. This dude beat Darren Elkins. I don't know. Lingo does crack. Like, he does hit hard, but the long layoff, it's just tough to pick Lingo in a fight like this. I know this is kind of a short notice bout too. I think Nate Landwehr is going to revel in this. He's going to get a win. He's going to go crazy. His post-fight interview is going to be great. He's going to give the best post-fight interview. Cheeto's might be good too, if Cheeto gets a win here. But I mean, it's kind of made for Nate Landwehr to win this fight, right?
Mm-hmm. I sure think so.
Like, it just don't. Nate Landwehr loses when athletic dudes that have power hit him with weird shit that end up being like knees up the middle. Just don't know if, I mean, maybe Austin Lingo can uppercut him, but probably not. I just think Nate Landwehr is going to put a pace on him. He's going to hit him with a lot of strikes. He's going to do it for 3 rounds. He can take him down if he wants. Nate Landwehr is hittable, but he's also tough, you know? And I just don't think Lingo is going to beat Nate Landwehr. He's going to have to knock him out too. Like, he's not going to squeak out a decision against him.
No. So
Landwehr by decision is what I'm thinking here.
All right. That brings us to the co-main event of UFC San Antonio. It is a women's bantamweight matchup between former champ Holly Holm and Yana Santos. Holm, the 41-year-old fighting out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, is 14-6 overall. She is 7-6 since joining the UFC out of LFA and a few other promotions where she had fought, but she is a former UFC bantamweight champ, having handed Ronda Rousey the first loss of her career with a sensational head kick in one of the biggest upsets in MMA history. She is also a former UFC featherweight title challenger. She lost her last time out. It was a very close split decision against Ketlen Vieira in the main event of UFC Fight Night 206 last May. Prior to that, she had won back-to-back fights over Raquel Pennington and Irene Aldana before taking all of 2021 off. So the 41-year-old former champ is looking to get back in the win column. And standing in her way is the woman who was still Yana Kunitskaya the last time we saw her in the cage. The 33-year-old is 33-year-old Russian, is also 14-6 with 1 no contest as well in her mixed martial arts career. She is 4-3 since joining the UFC as a former Invicta bantamweight champ. She is a former UFC featherweight title challenger, as she was one of the Invicta bantamweight contenders who was drafted as part of the Chris Cyborg meal plan when she first signed with the UFC. That didn't go well, but the rest of her UFC run has gone pretty well. She lost her last time out. It was a first round TKO at the hands of Irene Aldana at UFC 264 back in July of 2021, almost 2 years ago. Prior to that, she had back-to-back wins over Yulia Stoliarenko and Ketlen Vieira. So been almost 2 years since we've seen Santos in the cage. Since then, she has married her longtime fiance, former UFC multi-division contender Thiago Santos. They have a baby together. Obviously, a little controversy there, as she was accused of having fought while pregnant in one of her fights, something she denies and really is beyond the scope of this podcast. But I mean, not our business anyway, for the most part. What is our business is that Holm is a strong favorite here. She's minus 200, Santos plus 160. Holly Holm, Keith and I have talked about this before. Gatekeeper is a tough term to use, just because it means different things to different people. If you are the fighter who you got to beat this guy or girl to be good enough to be in the UFC, that's one kind of gatekeeper. If you're like Brad Tavares, and okay, if you can beat Brad Tavares, you're a top 10 middleweight in the UFC. If you can't beat him, you're not. That's another kind of gatekeeper. Holly Holm is almost like an all-star goalie. She has just been standing in front of Amanda Nunes in 2 divisions, at 135 and 145, and been like, if you can't get past me, then you can't get to Amanda Nunes. And guess what? Nobody can get past me. Like, Holly Holm has basically held an 2 divisions.
For Amanda Nunes.
I mean, not that these people would have had much of a prayer against Nunes, but just, she just keeps turning them aside. She has 6 losses in the UFC. The Ketlin Vieira loss is the first time she lost that wasn't a title fight.
Yeah.
For that, Miesha Tate, Valentina Shevchenko. Actually, that one might not have been a title fight.
The Shevchenko one.
Yeah. But then Jermaine Duranami, title fight. Chris Cyborg, title fight. Amanda Nunes, title fight. And then Ketlin Vieira. And the Ketlin Vieira fight, I don't know how you scored it, but I scored it for home.
A lot of control.
But it was either way, it was a razor close 5-round fight. Like everyone had it 48-47 for one woman or the other. Home used to be obviously she's one of the most credentialed strikers in UFC history. It's ironic that boxing is almost the least of her skills in MMA because, as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, Ring Magazine still had her as their greatest pound-for-pound female boxer of all time. And she crossed over to MMA and turned into this head kick machine. And then later in her career, she has turned into... She's a wrestler when she needs to be. She's a clinch grinder. She's everything but a lights out boxer. It's kind of funny. But earlier in her career, she, would strike like a snake with nasty power. Again, especially in her kicks. The famous one on Rousey, obviously. She put away Betch Correia with one. She's hurt other women with them. In the last few years, definitely become grindier. She just flat out wrestled Megan Anderson, a woman that was like twice her size, easily took Anderson down with ease and just ground out a decision. She's still a nullifier. She's still very, very defensively sound. The people who have hit her cleanly, it's really Amanda Nunes, and Amanda Nunes. Yeah. Like fighting against Jermaine Durandamy, a woman who's about as credentialed in kickboxing as Holm is in boxing. She lost the fight, but it's not like she got outstruck. Just Holm, against all odds, has a game that's kind of built to stay competitive in her 40s.
That's what I was gonna say. That you took the words out of my mouth. Where I don't think at women's bantamweight, being 41 years old with this game that's kind of transformed into more of like a control, grappling, clinching type game. I don't, especially at women's bantamweight, I don't think it's problematic. I feel like you could kind of, especially someone in her athletic shape, she's in great shape. She just I feel like her fights are probably, I think her workouts are probably harder than her fights.
Probably.
Not even kidding. I've watched her do 50 pull-ups on her social media. I couldn't I'm watching her. I've seen her workout. She has a fitness career after this. I wouldn't be surprised to go see her if she went and did those, fitness shows. She's in great shape. For Yana, I want to say Kunitskaya, but Santos, I just in her losses, she's got wins in the UFC that are good wins, but all of her losses, she's gotten drubbed.
Yep.
All of her losses are all drubbings. I don't know if Holly Holm is going to be someone that's just going to go and crush her like that, but I just don't know what Yana's even good at. I know her game. I know she wants to grapple. I know she wants to be a topside grappler. I know that's what she wants to do, but that just doesn't mean that she's good at it. I feel like Holly Holm is probably a better grappler than her. I think Holly Holm's more physical, even at 41. I think Holm can just kind of do, it's one of those things, everything you can do, I can do better. And I just don't Holm would not get punched out like that. The way that Yana did against Aldana, that just wouldn't happen to Holm. And then Yana doesn't have anything. What is she gonna do that is gonna hurt Holly Holm? What is she gonna do to out wrestle her? She's not stronger. Yana's a big girl for that division.
Yeah,
but Holm's bigger. Holm's gonna be stronger. Holm has to have lost a step to lose this fight, because unlike Ketlin Vieira, Yana doesn't have big power. I just don't know what she can do. This fight's probably going to suck too.
That's the thing I'm most worried about here, is that this could be a draggy fight, because however you scored it, the Holm versus Vera fight was not exciting.
No.
But again, I thought Holm won it, but even if you think she lost it, it was the first time she'd run into somebody at bantamweight that was bigger and maybe even stronger than her.
Yeah.
Like, Vera is a huge bantamweight, which obviously, since she misses weight all the time. Yana Santos is very strong for a bantamweight, and she had a physical transformation starting maybe 3 or 4 years ago, kind of when she moved to ATT full time, right around when she started dating Thiago Santos. And you know what? If I was dating Thiago Santos, I'd get in better shape too. But you know, she had a transformation from her Invicta days to kind of her last couple of years in the UFC. But even that version of Santos, I don't know if she's as strong as Holm, but she's not going to be able to just shove Holm into the fence and look for body locks and trips like she does in her UFC performances. You mentioned that when she loses, she gets drubbed. Yeah, like all of her UFC wins are by decision, and they're all pretty competitive decisions. And all of her losses, the wheels all fell off and she got destroyed. Oh my
God.
This, I mean, something's gonna give here though, because Holly Holm is no longer a distributor of that kind of ass kicking. Like, the Betch Correia fight was the last time she just lanced somebody, and that's a long time ago. But Santos isn't going to win a Santos fight against her here. I think Santos is just going to, and you kind of outlined this, she's going to run into somebody that everything you can do, I can do better. And just, she's going to want to win clinch battles. She's going to want to get takedowns and go to work from top position. And those are all things that Holm, even at 41, probably still does better than her. So give me Holm in a decision here, and maybe she retires. I don't know. I'm sure as an ex-champ, she makes pretty good money.
Oh yeah.
I mean, no matter how invested you are, if you're already staying in insane shape, and hey, I can show up once or twice a year and make $500,000, you know, beating up on the Yana Santos of the world, it'd be hard to say no to. Maybe
she's not fighting people that are like, she's not Justin Gaethje.
Yeah.
Like, she's not fighting those type of fights. So, like, you know, her longevity just gets extended, number one, due to her opponents. Like, she had to fight Amanda Nunes every time she fought her. She'd probably already, you know, she'd probably be gone. But when you can have even Caitlin Vera, like, she didn't get beat up. No, she's not taking tons of head trauma.
Caitlin Vera, like her Holm's last 3 fights, Caitlin Vera, top 5 contender who was probably in line for title shot if you beat her. Yeah. Irene Aldana was a top 10 fighter. Raquel Pennington, a top 10 fighter. And you know what? Justin Gaethje took more damage
in one round.
In the first round. Yeah, I was going to say in the first round of his fight with Rafael Fiziev than Holm took in all 3 of those fights put together.
And you could probably add another one on there. I'd throw Megan Anderson on there too.
Well, yeah. Did Anderson land a strike?
No.
Like, yeah. So, yeah, give me the immortal Holly Holm to pick up a pretty one-sided win. It may not be appointment viewing, but yeah, the ageless and still very relevant Holly Holm by decision.
Yeah, I'm all over that. It's probably going to suck, and I don't ever wish retirement on people, but like, no. At this point, at this stage for Holly Holm too, like, she's got all her ducks in a row. She's got her money, like, right off into the sunset on a win, or hang around until Amanda Nunes leaves and then get an immediate title shot, because she'll get one.
Yep. With that, we come to the main event of UFC on ESPN 43, a bantamweight contenders match between Marlon Vera and Corey Sandhagen. Vera, the 30-year-old Ecuadorian by way of Southern California, is 27-1 overall. He is 14-6 in the UFC. He is on a 4-fight win streak. Since dropping a unanimous decision to Jose Aldo just a little over 2 years ago, he has rattled off 4 straight wins over Davey Grant, Frankie Edgar, Rob Font, and Dominic Cruz. 2 of those, the Edgar and Cruz wins, were wins over former champs, living legends, that involved him stopping them in a way very, very few people ever have. So he is riding a ton of momentum here. And if not for a wealth of deserving contenders at bantamweight, might be even closer to a title shot than he already is. However, he needs to get over at least one more hurdle before he gets that call, and it takes the place of former interim title challenger Sandhagen. 30-year-old Colorado native is 15-4 overall. He is 8-3 in the UFC. He is coming off a win. He pounded Song Yadong into a doctor stoppage between rounds in the headliner of UFC Fight Night 210 last September. Prior to that, he had dropped back-to-back fights to TJ Dillashaw and Petr Yan. Both of those were by decision. So Sandhagen looking to keep it green here. Vera looking again to extend that win streak to 5 straight and maybe mint himself as the guy sometime before the end of 2023. Sandhagen is a slight to moderate favorite. He is minus 145, Vera plus 125. Dev, I will flip this one to you first. Who you got in this one, and how do you see this one playing out?
Both of these guys have losses on the record where, like, did Sandhagen really lose the TJ Dillashaw fight? And then did Cheeto really lose the Song Yadong fight? You know, like,
and it took place at 145 anyway. And yeah,
like, that was just weird. But both of these guys, like, these guys might be the most exciting bantamweights on the roster right now,
which is saying something.
Yeah. Like, I mean, a lot of people hated on Merab's performance of Petr Yan. I thought it was fucking awesome.
Brilliant.
Like, that was like he might be the best bantamweight on the planet after that. Not even kidding. And he kind of alluded to him in Aljo's training sessions a little bit in the post fight. But to loop back to this is a really, really good fight. Like, this is fight of the year type level. Like, these two dudes do the same thing in their own way. Who do you think is the more diverse striker? You want to say Sandhagen right away.
Sure.
But when you really think about it, who is more diverse?
Okay. You know what? The reason that Sandhagen's name is the one that immediately comes out is that Sandhagen's preferred tools are rare at bantamweight. He may not have a wider repertoire of techniques, but
Cheeto
the ones
too.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, the answer might be Cheeto. It's just that when I think of the things that Sandhagen does well, it's like, well, I mean, he throws flying knees, he throws head kicks, he's got a great jab. I'm like, maybe those are like the 3 main tools he has, and it's just so few people have it that I instantly think of him as more diverse when he may just be different.
It's weird because they're both super diverse strikers and they're both super potent in their own way. Mm-hmm. Corey Sandhagen has a lot of volume. He is not very defensively sound. I think that's something he's working on. He does like to incorporate takedowns in his game. A little bit more of low power, higher volume with a good diversity, and he has a lot of different tools. You could see he was kind of falling on that jump knee against Petr Yan, and it just like didn't work in that fight against a guy like Yan. Cheeto, on the other hand, is like a little weird Yoel Romero with just like with a lot more tools, but the same type of just like Cheeto has gotten to the point in his career where he's not scared of anything. And you can tell when he fights. Like, there is not one thing you could do to Cheeto in an MMA fight outside of put a gun to his head that's going to make him panic. Like, he's so composed. And Cheeto is one of those weird guys to where, like, he just doesn't wear any damage. It's super, super weird. Like, in his fight with Rob Font, like, you look at the striking numbers and you look at his face, like, I don't know. He does a lot of pillaring, and I know that's something that Keith doesn't like, but he does a lot of weird deflecting. Like, his deflecting is, kind of reminiscent of like Anderson Silva with just like weird, parrying and deflecting. He deflects a lot of shots. He's really, really good at deflecting shots. It's a really weird defensive tactic that you don't see often in MMA.
But when he comes from Colin Oyama, who's the guy that was Rampage's first real trainer, it makes all the sense because Rampage also pillared. Rampage also was really good at parrying with his hands.
And also like that good upper body, like just really good, like roll, like shoulder. He's just really good at deflecting, maneuvering. Sandhagen's got a great jab. He really relies on his jab. That's like his main tool. He'll jab to the body, jab to the head. He'll plant his feet into the pocket. He's got good counters in the pocket. Cheeto, on the other hand, will just kind of hang in the pocket, deflect shit, do weird shit. I don't know what he's been putting in his water, but like he fucking hurts people. Like, I mean, no one's ever done. I mean, Henry knocked out Dominic Cruz, but that, I don't want to say it was a fluke, but like that wasn't the same type of setup. And
Dominic Cruz was well enough to get up and complain immediately afterwards. He wasn't getting up and complaining after Vera iced him. He was getting up and asking if anybody wrote down the license plate of that truck.
And where's my nose?
Yeah.
Because his nose was fucking flattened.
Yeah, he Arlovski'd him.
Yeah. And there's just a lot of similarities in, and I know it's like everyone said this in the beginning of Sandhagen's career. There's like a lot of similarities in their footwork and stuff like that. Cheeto has gotten to the point too, especially under Perillo, where like they're able to dissect people. They're able to pick up patterns, and they're able to, Cheeto makes his reads. Like he's a very makes his reads guy. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to go straight into my pick. I don't like this line. I think it's a bad line. I think Cheeto is a really, really live underdog here. Corey Sandhagen is very hittable. He does do a lot of damage, but like, I think Petroyan's game and Cheeto's game are very similar, and I think Cheeto has more tools, and I think Cheeto's more punishing. Cheeto's got a better kicking game. The only problem with Cheeto here is his defensive wrestling is not as good as Petroyan's, and Corey Sandhagen does like to mix in those takedowns, and he did show that in his most recent fights. But the Song Yadong fight, like if Song's eye wasn't battered, like Song Yadong had a lot of success in that fight too. And I just don't think you can hang around for 5 rounds with Cheeto anymore. Cheeto's really active off his back. If you take him down in 1 round, he has a very active guard. He throws a fuck ton of elbows off his back. He'll try to submit you off his back. He's going to do things to where even if you get the takedown, you're going to think about it. After that, maybe you might take him down in the 2nd round, but you're like, man, that guy hit me with 17 million elbows and I didn't get any offense off. I was better off on my feet. And I just think Cheeto makes his reads. Sandhagen's hittable. If he could make a read on Dominic Cruz and catch him circling the pocket, Dominic Cruz is more defensively sound than Corey Sandhagen. I mean, just look what he did to Rob Font. It literally looked like Rob Font was a victim of a mugging with a lead pipe. Mm-hmm. And Rob Font has a similar offensive game to Sandhagen, where it's just a lot of offense, a lot of higher volume. And I don't know what Sandhagen's going to do to hurt Cheeto. That jump knee didn't work on Petroyan. Like, then what happened? Petroyan made his reads and then had more and more success. I could see Cheeto just hurting him in 2 or 3 rounds or maybe finishing him. But you just can't hang out around. The current tape shows that you just can't hang out with Cheeto Vera anymore. And Corey Sandhagen is not the venomous dude to get him out in 1 round. And he doesn't have the submission grappling game to take him down and submit him. Cheeto hung out in the pocket with a dude like Davey Grant. Say what you want about Davey Grant. Davey Grant's got fucking power. He cracks. Mm-hmm. Look at the Adrian Yanez fight if you want to go back to look at, like, I don't know, man. I just think the line's off here. I think this should be 100% pick 'em fight. Give me the underdog with Cheeto. I just think you can't hang out with him for 5 rounds anymore and be hittable. And I don't think the volume matters. I just don't think Sandhagen volume matters. You could throw 200, you can connect with 250 significant strikes on Cheeto Vera, and he looks like a newborn baby. It's the weirdest thing. I just don't know if it matters anymore.
How do you see it ending, or does it go to the decision?
I think it's going to go to decision. I think there's going to be a couple rounds where Sandhagen does have success, may outvolume him, but then he just gets hurt 2 or 3 times. And, impact.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I should have gone first, because now you stole my thunder, because I'm all over what appears to be the upset here. I was a little surprised at the line myself when I started prepping for this fight. Obviously, Sandhagen has 1 strike power, but it's been done against fighters that are really not like Vera and don't do things. I mean,
inhuman. He's inhuman. It's weird.
I mean, Sandhagen has the flying knee. He has the unbelievable spinning wheel kick on Marlon Moraes, but those things just Vera does not habitually put himself into situations where that would even work on him. Like the flying knee,
if you hit him with it, it might not hurt him.
That's the other problem. I mean, Edgar, he caught Edgar coming in for a takedown. It took a little longer, but it was basically Masvidal versus Askren, only made even worse because Sandhagen was way taller than Edgar and took flight. And the wheel kick against Moraes came in a fight. He was already doing very well. I like how you mentioned that Vera just hurts people at this point. He has 1 strike knockout power. He has serious power, but also he's just like a wood chipper. His game does not resemble it at all, but he's starting to feel like that run Tony Ferguson had, where there would be memes going out on Twitter this is Tony Ferguson's last 7 opponents at the end of the fight, and it just looks like a fucking horror movie.
Just mangled.
Yeah. Vera's getting to that point where everything he does hurts. I like that you kind of highlighted the way that he has become a guy that gets reads since being with Jason Perillo. Jason Perillo is another one of the guys, and it's funny because I think of him and Trevor Whitman as the 2 guys, and it's even more difficult for me to deal with because from any angle other than dead on, they look exactly the same. If you see Trevor Whitman and Jason Perillo from the side or from the back or from a 60-degree angle, they look exactly the same. They have to look right at you. They're like, oh, okay, got it.
It's the same haircut, same facial features too.
The same free haircut, yeah. But Perillo is the other guy who's best at taking fighters who are already top fighters and already have a well-established striking style from wherever they came up and making them better. Yeah. You think of what Whitman has done with Gaethje, with Usman, even if he's coming off a couple losses, with Rose Namajunas. You think of what Perillo did. If you told me that someone was going to take Chris Cyborg at age 32 and revamp her striking, I would have laughed at you. Same with Michael Bisping, and he
knocked out Luke Rockhold.
Yeah, he did that for both of them, and he's doing that for Vera. Vera had a kickboxing style that was very influenced by Colin Oyama being his first coach, and he's just kind of taken him to a different level. There are things that Sandhagen can do to win this fight, but they would be out of character for Sandhagen, and they would still require him to thread the needle. He is a deceptively good offensive wrestler. You mentioned that. And it's not even just purely tall man takedowns. Usually when you get to have a 5'11" bantamweight that has a surprisingly good takedown game, you think, oh, he must be, maybe a Neil Magny type.
Level change.
Exactly. He shoots for takedowns like you wouldn't expect a tall, lanky guy to do. It's not the collar tie and ankle pick or knee tap. It's not just clinch, get an underhook and tip him over. He has a good conventional takedown game. If he wants to lean on that, Vera can still be taken down. He's super active off his back, but that's something Sandhagen could do. If he just wants to hang out and try and jab and 1-2 and front kick Vera to death while waiting for a chance to try to zap him with a head kick or flying knee, That's playing with fire. Just all of Sandhagen's
covered in gas.
Yes. All of Sandhagen's, and I'm not to say he couldn't do it. Sandhagen's an incredible fighter. I think it's not a beauty contest, but he's one of the most enjoyable and aesthetically pleasing strikers to watch in that division. Like right up there with, honestly, O'Malley and Yanez. Just so not to say he couldn't do it. Like he's the favorite here. I understand why. I mean, he's fought a great level of competition. He's fought for a title. But yeah, just all the things he does best and does most instinctively do not line up well with the fighter Marlon Vera is right now. It's incredibly admirable, the progress that Vera has made. He's been in the UFC for so long. I know he wasn't the first Ecuadorian in the UFC because you had like Rudy Moncayo at UFC 6 or whatever, but
he holds the flag. Like he's swinging that flag.
He's swinging that. He's the pioneer for Ecuadorian MMA in the modern era. And he was such a wild, undertrained fighter, just with raw aggression and athleticism and skills when he first got to the UFC. And he's improved so much since then. And you're right, dude. He gives no fucks, dude. You look at you go to Marlon Vera on Twitter, and his profile page says Cheeto, and the eye is a middle finger emoji. That's Cheeto Vera. Like I assume he cuts weights just by all the fucks he doesn't give. There's just like 10 pounds of fucks over in the corner that he doesn't give anymore.
He is like, go to his, like, you know how like these fighters will be sponsored by certain companies, certain brands, and they'll do like a little promo thing for their social media. He's even cursing during like his sponsorship. Like he just doesn't give a fuck, you know? Like, and I think that's actually a big thing in his game where he has gotten to the point where he has realized like, these other bantamweights aren't going to hurt me and I can hurt them. There's going to be a point where someone is just going to put 3 rounds of volume on him and he's not going to land that one shot and he's going to lose that fight. And this could be that one. But Corey Sandhagen gets hit. Petrian hurt him a lot. And I just don't, and I think Cheeto's more dynamic than Petrian. Yeah. I think he has the boxing and the Cheeto's kicking game. Those hook kicks that he was landing on Rob Font, like he's a more dynamic kicker than outside of like spitting wheel kicks. Like his kicking game is just incredible. His small Achilles heel is his wrestling defense, but then he's got such an active guard to where, I'm glad you're on him too. I think it's it's a big time good underdog play.
Yeah, and I think so too. And honestly, the line might even move between now and fight night. But I'm with you. I if this closed as a pick'em, I would think that's fair.
Yeah.
Intangibles are not. They don't count for anything. Like the fighter with the better story doesn't win because he has a better story. Like the outside of the cage stuff doesn't cross over and map 1-to-1 with the in cage stuff. But I remember Marlon Vera doing interviews with Sherdog like almost 10 years ago at this point, like within his first 2 or 3 fights in the UFC. And like, he's in the US, he barely speaks English. He's got a daughter with, I'm pretty sure it was hydrocephaly. He's like this 23-year-old kid. He's got a baby with a life-threatening, or at least quality of life-threatening issue where he's like having to do fundraisers for her healthcare. And he's like, I cannot get cut from the UFC. If I lose my job, if I lose my job in the UFC, like worse things are going to happen than I just have to look for a new job. Yeah. And I didn't think that guy would be on the doorstep of a title shot 8 years later or whatever it is, but I'm not surprised. And it goes down to what you've said a couple times different ways on this preview. He's not afraid of anybody across from him in the cage. And again, I know that's an intangible and that doesn't overcome a deficit in skills. But you know what? The fact that he is so skilled now does come directly from that drive.
Yeah.
He is still the guy that I cannot lose in the UFC. Like I've got to win every fight. Dude, I lived in Ecuador for a couple of years. I'm not saying it's a third world hellhole, but I know the town he came from.
It's not where I live. It's not where you live.
Yeah. I've been to Chone, Ecuador. If there's some part of him that's like, I am not going back there unless it's in a Mercedes, that would not surprise me one bit. So yeah, like those
he's
things
hungrier
don't...
today too than I feel like he's hungrier now than he was even at that point when he was 23 years old.
Now he has a little breathing room and he has time to actually get hostile about people. Like,
that's great.
He's kind of a low-key angry dude.
Little Marvin Vittori in him.
Little Marvin Vittori, you know. He's a guy that if he keeps winning, gets, you know, some more main event wins, challenges for a title, like obviously if he wins a title, there's some stardom there for the taking too. You mentioned some things about him, and it's almost like he's a Diaz brother who actually kept getting better at fighting instead of just deciding, this is what I'm good at, and I'll just stick with that, win or lose. He's got the middle finger attitude, but he has just obsessively improved as a fighter as well.
And he also does some desk work for the UFC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which is like, that gets you. I mean, we saw this. I think I might have said this to you during when Grasso won the belt. Like, the UFC loves when the people that work for them are champions.
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, the UFC loves it when they win, period. I mean, they gave Alan Jouban a bigger goodbye than some former champs.
Yeah.
Just because he'd been working on the desk for him. That absolutely. I don't even think I've given my pick for this fight yet, but I've got Vera by decision as well. And I think it'll be one of those fights that's exciting for as one-sided as it is. Because I think it could be one of those fights where Vera wins 4 rounds out of 5, but nonetheless, like, nobody's getting out of their seat because there are just moments of suspense, and Sandhagen like continues to give moments of hope to those who have betting slips in their hands or are rooting for him on a personal level right up to the very end. He is that dynamic a fighter, but I think it's Vera's time. He's fighting the best he ever has. He's beating better and better competition. He can see now the route to, if I can beat Sandhagen and one more guy, I could be the next guy for a title shot by the end of this year. And I think he gets it done on Saturday.
Yeah, he's one of the only guys on the roster, man, that's not a heavyweight, that can lose, you know, like punching exchanges 3-1, 3-1, 3-1, but then you're dead. And that's what I think it's going to look like. You know, Sandhagen's going to land 3 shots. Cheetah's going to land 1. The 1 is going to be like a ton of bricks, and then the other one is going to be like a 5-pound bag of flour.
Makes sense. Any other thoughts on this one?
No, man, I'm stoked. This is going to be great. I appreciate you for having me on too, man. This is fun. I love this.
Yeah. Well, this has been the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC on ESPN, Vera versus Sandhagen. I have been Ben Duffy, Sherdog senior editor. He has been Mr. Devin Tejada. Dev Goes Fishing, our ever capable 6th man, goes hard in the paint once again. If this is your first time watching one of our previews, first of all, thank you. We hope you enjoyed it. It is normally Keith Schillen and myself running these, but Dev has been a very capable substitute several times. Please do like, subscribe, leave us comments if you're watching this on YouTube. Keith and I are both very good about answering those comments. We'd love to hear if you think we're totally off base on some of these picks. If you have some upset picks of your own that maybe we didn't see, let us know. But most importantly, come back for the recap. Normally Keith and I are live on the Sherdog YouTube page about 10 minutes after the main event. I'll be out of town this week. I won't even be covering UFC San Antonio in person. I'm just going to be flat out of town. So Keith will be in with a substitute. It might very well be Dev, but come to the Sherdog YouTube page right afterwards where Keith takes the captain's chair. They will talk about all 13 of these fights in reverse order, starting from the main event, going all the way down to the first prelim. They'll talk about what was good, what was bad, what was surprising, what was controversial. There's always something. And the live chat on the YouTube video is open that whole time. So Keith and Dev will be taking your questions, your comments, your hot takes live and in real time. We have a growing community of friends that hang out with us after the fights. We would love to have you join them. Between now and then, thank you once again for watching. Enjoy the rest of your week, and by all means, enjoy the fights.